All right, welcome to our Land Use Committee meeting of April 30th, 2018. I'm Katie Tang, chair of this committee. I believe Supervisor Kim is now here. To my left is Supervisor Safai. Our clerk is Erica Major, and from SF TV, we'd like to thank Maya Hernandez and Charles Krimenek. Madam Clerk, are there any announcements for us?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of a file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the May 8th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you. Can you please call item 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow the owner of premises leased to the city for a public safety related use to resume a pre-existing self-storage use.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. And our sponsor is Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. And I don't have opening comments on this item. And I just want to bring up the planning department staff to present very briefly.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Audrey Buckus with the Planning Department staff. The Planning Commission heard this item on April 19th and voted unanimously to approve the ordinance with modifications. It's my understanding that Supervisor Kim has incorporated those changes in the draft before you today, and so we'd like to thank the Supervisor for incorporating those changes, which are largely clerical in nature. The Commission supports the legislation as it is aligned with many aspects of the general plan, including the community facilities policy to locate police facilities in a manner that will enhance the effective, efficient, and responsive performance of police functions, and the community safety policy to reduce the risks presented by the city's most vulnerable structures and provide assistance to reduce those risks. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions or comments, can we please, through the chair, open up for public comment on item number 1?
Okay, so public comment is open for item number 1. Any members? Okay, seeing none, then public comment is closed.
Thank you. So I do just have one amendment to make, and it's just a technical amendment that we need to change C4 on page 5, lines 4 through 5 to C1.
Okay.
Mr. Givner, is that correct?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. Actually, the document you've circulated has a number of amendments that reflect the Planning Commission's recommendations. So with the additional clerical tweak that you just mentioned. So I think the committee would adopt a motion approving all of those amendments which reflect the Planning Commission's recommendations.
Yes. So I just want to make a friendly amendment to the amendments. And then I'd like to make a motion to amend the language as the Planning Commission had recommended and has been distributed to committee members.
Okay. And we can do that without objection? Okay.
Great.
All right. Thank you. All right. And then can we get a motion on the amended item?
So move with positive recommendation to the full board.
Okay. And we'll do that without objection. Madam Clerk, item 2, please.
Item number 2 is a resolution responding to the recent proposal to expand the private marina located in Clipper Cove at Treasure Island.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you so much, members of this committee, and also to members of the public that are here on this item in regards to Clipper Cove on Treasure Island. This discussion at least has been with our office a little over the last 2 years as we have been working to convene a discussion with both the project sponsor / developer as well as the Treasure Island Development Authority and the Treasure Island Sailing Center, Sierra Club, and many stakeholders that care so deeply about Clipper Cove. This proposed marina has been through many iterations since we first started discussing the development on Treasure Island over 20 years ago, and has gone through many proposed iterations from both the project sponsor as well as TIDA in terms of expectations of what this marina would serve. Over time, over the last month and a year and a half, as we have been spending time with all of the stakeholders, it has become increasingly clear to me that Clipper Cove is best served as a space for as many of members of the public as possible. And the current usage, both with the Sailing Center, which partners with many of our schools, as well as many of our community organizations, really does provide the greatest access for so many families and youth, and a great way to get to enjoy the bay. And while it's certainly a need also for us to create slips for large boats, it is my preference that we keep our commitment to public recreation, public education, and environmental protection in this public open space. And so that is the resolution that I have submitted to the Board of Supervisors. So at this time, I would like to open up for public comment on this item, unless there are other questions or comments from committee members.
I'm just wondering, is the director of TIDA here at all, or anyone,
Yes,
a representative?
Mr. Bob Beck is here. We did not ask him to present, but he is available to answer any questions if needed.
I think it would be really helpful, just because I've been getting a lot of emails from many of you who are sitting here today about Clipper Cove and what's going on there, and have tried to reach out to Treasure Island to understand what is going on. A lot of the comments or concerns that I received were around youth programming or sailing and so forth. And so I just want us to have a clear understanding of what's actually happening. So if you could do maybe a brief presentation on that, that would be very helpful. Again, because this project is roughly almost 2 decades long. Some of us were not around when that was all developed.
Thank you, Chair Tang. Yes, this project, or the planning for Treasure Island in the Cove has been in progress for more than 2 decades. And last October, the TIDA board unanimously approved long-term leases for the expansion of the Treasure Island Marina and the continuation of the programs of the Treasure Island Sailing Center. These leases, which will come to the Board of Supervisors for approval, were not developed out of the blue, but represent a continuation of more than 2 decades of work planning for the redevelopment of the former naval station, Treasure Island. The base was initially listed for closure by the Department of Defense in 1993, and in 1994, the city formed a Citizens Reuse Committee to study proposed development plans for the island. That committee drafted the original base reuse plan, which was endorsed by the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission, and the Mayor in 1996. The reuse plan identified opportunities, constraints, and policy goals and recommendations, and has served as a framework for subsequent planning efforts. That original 1996 plan included an expanded and redeveloped marina as part of its proposals. In 1998, the authority issued an RFP to redevelop and expand the marina, and in 1999, the authority entered into an exclusive negotiating agreement with Treasure Island Enterprises. This was followed in 2001 by a term sheet and conceptual layout for a 400-slip marina. The authority also entered into its initial lease with Treasure Island Sailing Center in 1999, and the continuation of Treasure Island Sailing Center programs and the expansion of the marina have been the central programs throughout all subsequent planning for the Cove.
And you just said that, Director Beck, that in October of last year, the TIDA approved the long-term leases for the sailing center, and how long will that go for?
Those are 66-year leases. The Cove is subject to the Tidelands Trust, so there's a 66-year limit to leases on that property. The size and proposed layout of the expanded marina did not change from the time of the initial 2001 term sheet through 2015. The plan was evaluated in the 2006 EIS-EIR for the development of Treasure Island and reflected in the 2006 development plan endorsed by the Board of Supervisors and the Mayor, as well as the 2010 updated development plan, which was also unanimously endorsed by the Board. Finally, in 2011, the 2011 EIS-EIR again assumed an expanded 400-slip marina, although it did not re-evaluate the proposed expansion as the scope was unchanged from the 2006 environmental analysis. By 2015, litigation challenging the CEQA analysis of the program had been resolved, and we were preparing for the first transfer of land from the Navy to the authority. In anticipation of being able to move forward in conjunction with the Landside Development Program, Treasure Island Enterprises, the proposed developer of the marina, began planning for the design, permitting, and construction of the expanded marina. And the first step in this process was to sit down with Treasure Island Sailing Center to review the marina plan and changes to the plan necessitated by the Navy's work and by reconstruction of the causeway connecting Treasure Island to Yerba Buena Island. Between 2015 and 2017, Treasure Island Enterprises and the Sailing Center met upon multiple occasions to refine the proposed layout of the marina, including discussions facilitated by members of the Board of Supervisors and their staff. These discussions resulted in the compromised layout of a marina of 313 slips. The long-term leases approved by the Board of Supervisors have relied upon this compromised configuration. We plan to bring those long-term leases to the Board of Supervisors so that both programs can proceed with financing and permit processes through the Bay Conservation Development Commission and the Joint Aquatic Resources Permit application processes. So that provides background on the Cove.
Thank you for that helpful timeline. And so at this point then, what is sorry, not before us, but at least what the proposal is for a 313 slip marina instead of the 400 that was originally contemplated. Okay. And then again, with the Sailing Center, there's a 66-year lease that was just approved, so that program will not be jeopardized?
That program, yeah, that's for their landside facilities as well as for the kind of central and outer portions of the Cove.
Okay, so I just wanted that clarification because I'm not sure why, again, all the emails that I've received were around this program going away. Is there any sort of square footage or anything that's being reduced?
Through the proposed marina will occupy a larger footprint within the Cove, and that requires some modification obviously with the smaller footprint. The Sailing Center has used all of the Cove. But in the process between 2015 and 2016, the Sailing Center identified their needs. First, a 1,600-foot program area where they could conduct their classes with offsets from Pier 1, the existing pier out there, and the stronger currents that are at the outer portion of the Cove, as well as a offset on the inner side of the Cove of 250 feet to eliminate wind shadow from the marina facilities.
And I'm sorry, what was the offset? Because someone was coughing.
Sorry, there's a 1,600-foot diameter program area, as well as they had requested a 500-foot offset from Pier 1, which is at the southeast corner of the island, as well as a 200-foot offset from the marina wave attenuator to eliminate wind shadow from boats anchored in the marina.
Okay, thank you for that. And so I had seen correspondence, I guess, I can't remember, dating back to another board where it seemed like there was an agreement reached with the Sailing Center and Treasure Island. And so maybe later on when we hear from public comment, we'll see if that, I don't know if anything's changed or whatnot. But again, I was just a little alarmed by the number of emails that I'd received about Clipper Cove. And again, I think we all agree with the sentiment that's in the resolution around preserving the youth sailing programs and so forth. But what is being cut? I know that there are some interim uses, and how is that all being incorporated into the project overall?
Yeah, the focus in conversations with the Treasure Island Sailing Center has been on their educational programs, both in sailing and in their STEM, programs that they conduct with San Francisco Unified and other schools. And so that has been the focus.
That will continue.
And that will continue.
Okay.
There were some race layouts for collegiate racing that happened, my understanding is twice a year, as well as some high school race layouts that are in conflict with the current layout, but we can certainly look to those more occasional uses and see if there's another course configuration that would be compatible with the marina layout.
Okay, so I know Supervisor Safai's questions, but just my last question. So the collegiate racing and the high school racing, how often are they currently using it, and what's going to change as a result?
Yeah, those are interim uses that have been accommodated in the Cove over many years. while we were waiting for development. The historical layout of the race course, the collegiate race course in particular, has been used a great portion of the Cove, and as my understanding is, that's twice a year that they have events. And there may be alternate configurations that could accommodate those courses still, but the focus in the project has been to continue the programs of the sailing center and the expansion of the marina, as has been the case since '99.
Okay. Okay, Supervisor Safai?
Yes, thanks. First, I want to say thanks to Supervisor Kim for bringing this resolution forward, because I think there's a lot of really important issues that are brought forward here. I've heard from a significant number of constituents from my district as well, particularly around the issue of, as it pertains to STEM and Unified School District and the thousands of children that use the marina on an annual basis. But then there's also a lot of really important environmental issues that are brought up in this resolution. And I know that there was 2006, 2011, and those environmental impact reports. Some of the things, how were the issues of the impact to the natural resources and the discussion of dredging and this is something I've heard for the eelgrass beds. I don't even know what that is, but I know that it's important to the Cove because it's referenced in here. So how are some of these issues addressed, and were they talked about in the environmental review back in 2006 and 11?
Yeah, the eelgrass in the Cove was identified in both the 2006 and 2011 EIRs as a sensitive species, and the development of the marina is required to be to preserve and not jeopardize those beds. And then the other issue that's discussed quite extensively in the resolution is sedimentation and dredging. And all of those issues will be the next step beyond securing a lease for the project will be for the applicant to go to the Bay Conservation Development Commission and the Joint Aquatic Resources Permit application process, which includes also Army Corps of Engineers and Division of Fish and Wildlife, to do the additional analysis on an interactive basis with those bodies to demonstrate that both the dredging activities as well as the speed of boats are protective of the eelgrass beds. But the eelgrass beds, as I said, was identified in the
and that has to be written into the lease agreement prior to the lease agreement being executed. That has to be worked out with BCDC.
No,
is that what you just said?
No, I actually the opposite. We anticipate that the Treasure Island Enterprises needs to have the lease in place to move to the next stage of the project in financing and permit application with BCDC. So anticipate bringing the leases to the Board of Supervisors, and then with the lease in place that the Treasure Island Enterprises would move to BCDC for that next stage of the process of permitting.
So what I get from a lot of the emails and what I get from the resolution that's put forward is that there's still consternation about the size of the marina and the impact that it will have on existing uses and the environment. And so I don't know if I heard you say clearly, but will the existing educational uses be impacted by the size of the marina?
I don't believe the existing educational uses will be impacted. Carissa Harris Adamson, who is with the Sailing Center, is also here. I think it may affect some future expansion plans, but the existing programs of the Sailing Center, I believe, will not be impacted.
So if it's, Supervisor, would it be okay, Kim, if we call up the person from the Sailing Center?
Yes, so we do have several, we have several members of the public that are available to answer any questions. We have Carissa Harris Adamson from the Treasure Island Sailing Center, as well as Avery Whitmarsh, who's Friends of the Sailing Center, and Rid Jepson from U.S. Sailing that can answer any questions. But I think I just need to clarify, Director Beck. I think Supervisor Safai is asking if there if we do move forward on a proposed expansion of the marina, as was discussed with the project sponsor in TIDA, would that impact the current educational program?
It is my understanding that it would not.
So we can greatly expand the number of slips and the size of the boats in Clipper Cove, and it would not impact the educational program offerings at all today.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Thank you, Director.
So through the chair and supervisor, can we call someone from the
Yes,
Sailing Center?
absolutely.
Okay.
Is that okay?
So why don't we bring up Ms. Harris-Adamson? And if I did call your name, if you don't mind just sitting in the front row so that you can be available for questions, that would be great. Doesn't matter. They both work.
Hi, my name is Dr. Carissa Harris-Adamson, for the record. I'm chair of the Treasure Island Sailing Center.
Thank you. Sorry. We're juggling a lot of things today. So I just wanted to hear from your perspective, and I know that Supervisor Kim also asked that same question to Director Beck, but in your opinion, because I see emails, I don't know if that email was from you in 2011, but there was we've come to an agreement, we've agreed on something, so I just want to hear once and for all, because I care deeply about the educational programs, and I know a lot of the children and families and educators in all of our districts. This is a phenomenal resource. So we want to hear directly from you. Do you believe the proposed development impacts the current uses that you have for educational opportunities?
Yes, thank you for having me up to clarify. And I appreciate your interest and support of the programs. I really do. Just for the record, I have been with the organization since its inception. So I was actually the very first instructor at Treasure Island Sailing Center, and that was as a volunteer. I have been on the U.S. sailing team 3 times, so I'm very aware of what kind of space requirements are needed for beginner sailing as well as all the way through advanced sailing. The current marina plan does have a negative impact on our current programs. I can clarify specifically which ones those are. Our youth beginner program requires new sailors to sail up to the beach to be able to practice in lighter winds. The current marina plan makes it very difficult to do that. That is a fundamental change. So that is pretty much...
And is that for children specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
We start actually at age 6, and we go up to 18. That particular use would be most difficult for very beginners, and the primary ages for those students are typically in the 7 to 12 age range.
Because they would be shifted into an area that's not as calm.
The area that they would be sailing in is windier, it's deeper, and again, the access to the beach is what's really critical for safety training, for capsize drills, et cetera. And so with the current configuration, we would have to tow a boat up there. They likely would not be able to sail there themselves.
So and again, I'm not trying to, it's not a game of gotcha, but because I've only been getting up to speed on this more recently, there was an email from 2016 that from you to members of the board that said you're happy to say that you've come to an agreement on the size of the footprint. So was that more of a, you feel like
I can
that's what you feel like at the time, but you're not 100% happy?
Yeah, sure, I can clarify that. So when we were faced with the new marina proposal that was not shared with us necessarily proactively at all.
Oh.
So it was actually submitted as part of a meeting. Someone told us about it. We found it, identified it, realized that it was much different than what we had seen prior. We were faced with potentially having to shut down. So when we say we were happy to continue our foundation that we've been building over the last 20 years. I agree.
So is this A25C footprint, was that something that you were presented that is not what the 400 slip marina is? It different? Or is it the same?
I'll have to...
Anyway, I don't
I'm sorry
know.
about the A25C.
Yeah,
so we actually presented 3 marina
Okay.
configurations. There was a minimal impact, which was our preference.
Okay.
There was a moderate impact and a maximal impact.
Got it.
They went with a maximal impact.
Okay.
And that allows us to continue most of our programs in the sense that some shade of it, but it certainly eliminates, like I said, access to the beach, set sail, learn, as well as high school and college sailing.
Right, so say that last part again.
I said it limits drastically the beginners getting to the beach, our Set Sail Learn program, as well as high school and college sailing.
Okay. So it sounds like that there were plans that were presented to you, multiple plans, but then the one that's going forward, that's presented today, has the most impact on, or the one that we have in front of us, the 400 plus, has impact.
So it's a 313 marina plan right now.
The 400 one was the previous.
The prior one, that was
313 is the one that's before us today.
Correct.
And that has significant impact from your perspective.
Less than the 400 slip one, but significant impact still.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other particular questions right now.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Sorry, just going through the resolution because it was packed with quite a few things, whether it was environmental or CEQA related or the financial fiscal feasibility of the project. I wanted to ask, I guess this would be a question for Director Beck, unless the project sponsor happens to be here. I don't know. But there was, I had received an email or a couple saying that the project sponsor was not able to actually demonstrate fiscal feasibility for this project, and I think our city has, or at least TIDA has reviewed it. So I just wanted to know where that, if we can reconcile that fact. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the project sponsor, Treasure Island Enterprises, Jay Wallace, is also here to speak to that. But I believe that comment in the resolution referred to the deliberations with the Division of Boating and Waterways regarding a $4.2 million loan that DBAW has approved to finance the marina expansion. But I think it's worth noting that DBAW did approve that loan, and we fully anticipate when we bring the leases to the Board of Supervisors, working through with the budget legislative analysts, a thorough vetting of the financial viability of the project and any questions that might arise.
Thank you. Can we ask the project sponsor to come up then and weigh in on this? And in particular, I'm just going to paraphrase from email correspondence I received that a financial feasibility study on the current marina proposal conducted by the state of California and published in April of last year finds that the developer proposal fails to account for the annual costs of the maintenance dredging necessary to keep the marina open after construction. And further finds that this oversight significantly increased the risk of project default and so forth, and underestimating of revenue and expenses. So anyway, if you could just respond to that, that would be great.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair and fellow board members. My name is Jay Wallace. I'm a partner at Kenwood Investments. We are the owner of the Treasure Island Enterprises and the Marina Project. First of all, before I answer the question, I wanted to say a couple things. One is that we are really very delighted and pleased over the support we've received from the Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Kim, her predecessor, Supervisor Daly. They are our home-based supervisors. And over 20 years, we have had great relations with the Board of Supervisors and our district supervisor, and for that we want to thank you. I also want to share Supervisor Kim's earlier comments. We too want to protect the Cove. We want to make sure that the kids are safe. We want to see that the program continues, which is why we engaged in good faith negotiations for close to 2 years with the Sailing Center to try to accommodate all of that. As to the specific question, Madam Chair, we spent 3 meetings with the Division of Boating and Waterways. Many of the people who are here today were at those meetings. Hunter and I, who you'll probably hear from Hunter, chased each other around to Sacramento, Long Beach, and I think San Francisco, so we covered the state at the DBAW. We were required, as part of the granting of the DBAW, or the approval of the DBAW loan, to come up with a dredge reserve to take care of this issue. It was something that is very unusual, as I understand it, in the marina business, but it was a requirement that was imposed on us. And as a condition, a mitigation measure, a condition of approval of the loan, there is, and I don't remember the dollar amount, I think it was something like $250,000 that we had to have a revolving fund for at all times. But nonetheless, it was, there is a requirement in the Division of Boating and Waterway loan that we have a dredge reserve to cover these issues. So I hope that answers the question.
Supervisor Salfai.
Yeah, just to clarify the last comment, did you say something about the depth of the cove?
I did not speak specifically about the depth of the cove. I said that we are required to have a dredging reserve fund to be in place, so that in the future, should there be a need for additional dredging, there would be a fund available, so that we, the city, Division of Boating and Waterway, or any others, are looking for available funds to make that dredging.
So you're required to have just to reiterate, you're required to have a financial reserve that's specifically designated to deal with the issue of dredging and depth of the cove?
Yes.
And that's in the lease agreement?
I believe that's also in the lease. I'd have to double check, Bob, maybe you can help me, but it certainly is a condition of our granting of the loan. And if it's not in, I think it is in the lease, actually, as I recall.
So the reason I asked that is because it's specifically called out here in the resolution. So I wanted to make sure if that's something that you guys were already dealing with.
Yes, we believe so.
And then what about the issue that we just heard from the San Francisco Sailing Center about the impact to existing programs? Because sounds like, based on, I mean, you sent us a letter with attachments and talks about that there was agreements, but it sounds like there was multiple plans presented. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. Just to reiterate quickly, 96, the marina was conceived as the reuse plan. 2006, it was approved as a 400 slip marina. Supervisor Daley and his colleagues approved the 400 slip unanimously, 11-0. 2011, the master development came up. Supervisor Kim, you were part of that vote. Marina was 400 slips. It too was approved 11-0. And so between 2011 and 2015, there was a CEQA lawsuit that was defeated. And so in 2015, we decided, like the Sailing Center, to move forward with our plans to finish up the permitting and the financing. In 2015, at the end of the year, I received a phone call. And by the way, during 2006 and 2011, the 400 slip marina, which was, I think in those days, 2,200 lineal feet long, now it's 880. So you can see that we shrunk 1,300 lineal feet to make the accommodations. But in 2006 and 2011, nobody in this audience opposed the marina, including the Sailing Center, and they were well aware of what we were doing because we'd been coordinating with them. And we, frankly, Treasure Island Enterprises, we to this day support all of the activities of the Sailing Center, of their youth programming. 2015, I received a phone call through Bob Beck that the Sailing Center wanted to meet with us. We immediately decided we would agree to meet with them. We spent most of 2016 and a little bit of 2017 in conversation with the Sailing Center. Members of the community, Hunter Cuttings particularly, participated in those conversations. The Board of Supervisors' offices convened several of those meetings. And yes, we went from 400 to 380 to 360 to 330, and we ultimately settled on 313 slips. We did that with the help of the board, of several of the board offices. We did that with good faith conversations with the Sailing Center. We believed, as Bob Beck indicated, that our compromise from 400 slips down to 313 slips, our compromise on the length of the transient dock, and our compromise on the length of the wave attenuator, all kind of complicated conversations, but in each instance, we shrunk and we shrunk and we shrunk and we shrunk and we shrunk because we had one goal in mind as well, which was to make sure that the sailing centers programs could continue and that the kids would be safe. Now, there may be some questions about that today, but certainly in October, end of October, early November of 2016, when Supervisor Avalos called us into his room, into his office, Carissa Harris was there, I was there, my business partner was there, Hunter Cutting was there. We all thought from our side that we had reached a deal that was going to accommodate the sailing center's STEM program. And so to Hunter Cutting's credit, he didn't agree. So he didn't agree. He was in the room with us. But we felt like the sailing center had agreed because their programming would be kept intact. Now, I don't want to put words in their mouth. You heard from Carissa. But we certainly felt like, in good faith, we sat down, we negotiated, we butted heads, we fought a little bit, but we came upon a compromise that not everybody got everything they wanted, but most people got most of what they wanted, and that we think is good public policy.
And did you, through the chair, did you codify that in any form of written document?
We didn't codify it in any written document other than the email that Carissa Harris sent to me and my business partner, to Bob, and to Supervisors Avalos and Kim and their staff. And Supervisor Avalos, within 24 hours, maybe less, wrote back and said, "Great."
Right. Yeah,
I see happy to see that. So that was the extent of the codification.
Okay. Thank you.
I also saw a press release from April of 2017 from the Sailing Center too. So in any case, Supervisor Kim.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I should say that this board has not weighed in on Clipper Cove. So there may have been an agreement by the Treasure Island Sailing Center, but this board has not put forward a proposal or an agreement. And I just wanted to clarify, because Mr. Wallace, you had stated that this Board of Supervisors passed an EIR 11-0 in 2011, and the EIR studied a very large marina, right, 400 slip marina. Is that correct?
No, I said, what Bob said was that the 2011 EIR incorporated the 2006 study of the 400 slip marina.
Right.
And so, yes, it was part of the 2011, but it was not a new study of the marina. It relied on the old study.
Thank you for the clarification. It's not, I just wanted to think of a time that we ever viewed an EIR as an agreement to a plan versus it just being studying a plan.
I don't think that, I agree with you. An EIR is not an approval of a plan. That's why we are here in front of you today, because we're getting ready to approve the lease.
We often try to study kind of the most expansive version of a proposal or project, so that when we do finally approve a project, it has been studied via an EIR. But if the proposal is smaller than what we have studied, then at least we know that the EIR has covered it. But in no way, I think it should be implied that this Board of Supervisors has approved anything because it approved a study.
We certainly, in 2006, there was a project-specific approval of the marina, and it was a programmatic approval of the master development. So in 2006, there was the big programmatic EIR that allowed the transfer to happen and the beginning of the master development, and as you know, I'm part of that as well. But in 2006, there was also, within the EIR, EIS, there was a project-specific 400 slip marina. Studied, exactly.
But not approved.
Well, when the board approved 11-0, the 2006 EIR, EIS, it approved
a study of a 400 slip marina.
That's right. It was not the lease.
But we did not approve a 400 slip marina.
We
approved the study of a 400 slip marina.
You approved the study of a 400 slip marina. That's correct.
I just think that's a very important clarification and distinction to make. I spent a lot of time on these large area plans because the district that I represent has a lot of them, and we frequently overstudy what is finally proposed because we want to make sure that we study the highest impact project area plan or project possible. And then at the board, we finally approve a project that is often smaller than what is studied in an EIR. So I just think it's important for members of the public and also this board to understand that in no way is approving a study an approval of a proposal.
I think that's absolutely accurate. And when we came back in 2017 with the smaller project, as you're describing right now. We were able to rely on the larger study that had been approved, not the project. And just for point of clarification, as you know, Supervisor, but for the rest of the folks, there was a good reason why the project wasn't approved in 2006 or 2011, and that is because the city didn't control the property. The land disposition had not taken place, as Bob Beck indicated, until 2015. So there was the inability to approve the specific project, but I would agree with everything you said in terms of sometimes the project gets smaller and that gets approved, and that's what we'd like to see happen in this instance.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wallace.
And Supervisor Kim, just to build upon your question, so was there, I was trying to do research on when this board might have weighed in, so again, going to your original question, but did we ever, as a body, weigh in on the overall Treasure Island Yerba Buena project at all? No?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, on the housing and land use proposal for the island, or are we talking about just the marina?
No, all of it. Like, did the housing,
Yes.
all of that include the marina as well?
No.
it didn't.
So in 2011, we certified the EIR, which studied the housing plan plus the marina. And then we passed and approved the development and disposition agreement with the project sponsor that covered specifically what we were building on the island itself, which is both Treasure Island and Yerba Buena. So this is the approval of the plan that included the housing, the infrastructure, the office, the hotel. Outside of the DDA, we left out Clipper Cove, the marina. And by the way, we spent a lot of time studying this issue because I don't want to go back on my word or the word of this Board of Supervisors if that word happened before my time on the board. So part of the reason why this has taken so long to weave its way through was that I want to make sure that this was something that was even within our discretion to put forward, because it's one thing for members of the public to advocate for me and for me to even say, I think this is a better plan. But if this board had previously approved a different proposed marina, I would not want us to go back on our word on that. But that's not what happened in this case. So now we do have an opportunity to weigh in terms of what we think is the best proposal to move forward. Now, it's true that there's been a discussion of a larger marina, whether 200, 300, 400 slip marina, and that we studied all of this, but at no point did this Board of Supervisors ever come to a final determination of what we supported and what we've approved, regardless of what the Treasure Island Sailing Center might have said 2 years ago.
Okay. All right. So lots of questions and answer. Oh, sorry, Supervisor Safai.
And I just want one point of clarification for the record, and thank you, Supervisor Kim, for clarifying that for the public. The real area that the definition and scope and final analysis of what we're talking about today will be finalized is the lease agreement, correct?
Correct.
And so the lease agreement has not come before us yet?
Correct.
Okay, so there is an opportunity. So this resolution talks about some goals for that conversation, and it sounds like there's going to be more conversations going forward between you and the Sailing Center and the Treasure Island Development Authority before the lease agreement comes back. Is that correct?
Certainly can happen, absolutely.
Sounds like that would be an important part of the conversation. But
I think that if I may, Supervisor, as you know, we made a request to continue the matter so that we could have that kind of conversation. There's very, very much in this resolution that we agree to. We want to protect the eelgrass. We've worried about the eelgrass. We've thought about the eelgrass. There are many things that we agree on. There are a few items in the resolution that we don't agree on. And that was the purpose of our request for a continuance so that we could continue to sit down with the department. Our door has always been open to the Sailing Center, as has theirs backwards to us. There's no reason, I think there's no reason why we can't continue to have a dialogue to see if we can resolve some of the issues.
But I guess what it sounds like to me, though, what I'm saying is, you have the district supervisor who's put forward a resolution that's very well thought out, and it sets some parameters for the conversation, but really the final agreement is the lease agreement, right? And that's really
correct.
And that has not come before us yet.
That is correct.
And it sounds like, based on what I'm hearing today, although we haven't had public comment yet, there's some more work to be done, and it sounds like you're open to that.
Director Beck?
I just also wanted to clarify that Again, the proposed lease between TIDA and Treasure Island Enterprises sets an envelope for development of the marina. Ultimately, the final footprint of the marina would not be finalized until they've gone through the BCDC process. And that BCDC permit process might further limit the size that the marina could develop.
So the lease agreement, but then what would happen if there's it talks about the scope, but not the final footprint? Say that one more time.
It talks about the scope, and it describes real property based on the current layout, but
it won't say the number of slip.
Well, it proposes up to 313 slips and an envelope for development.
But when you go to BCDC,
but they still would need to get their project entitlements.
So then would the lease agreement then be amended once BCDC weighs in?
It could be amended, particularly if it significantly affected the economics of the transaction.
And would that then come back to us again?
That would come back to you again.
So the first iteration, then BCDC weighs in, depending upon what they do, then it comes back. Then
it could come back if it affected the terms of the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and apologies to the public for the long discussion, but I think it helps all of us clarify what's really happening because, again, given the volume of emails, I certainly wanted clarity around what was really going on, and it was hard to find some answers. So with that said, let's open up to public comment then. So if members of the public would like to come up to speak on this item, Supervisor Kim has some speaker cards, but you can line up to your right.
Great, thank you, Chair Tang. So I'll just read some of the cards that I have in front of me. Robert Dean, Glenn Tihera, Avery Whitmarsh, Paul Zingard, Romel Barrientos, Paul Heineken, Connie Channon, Karen Knowles-Pierce, Valerie Santori. I just called the first 10 cards, and I do have more cards after that, so if the first 10 speakers could come up, that would be great. Please begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Dean. I'm a former executive director of the Treasure Island Sailing Center, and I wanted to come here and just further express to you how important this resource is to the people of San Francisco. The Treasure Island Sailing Center has thousands of kids that come through their program. You all know this. And that access to the beach is very important. I'm also an international race officer, and the discussion about the course configuration, being able to adapt to the new marina plan is not quite accurate. Sailboat racing courses are sailed to windward and to leeward, and access up into the cove where the slips are proposed to be is the windward area where we train and do our racing, practicing for racing, as well as the 4 or 5 events a year that are major events for that racing. Sailing up into that cove is very important, and course configuration really cannot be adjusted to accommodate this. The marina has a huge impact on the Treasure Island Sailing Center programs, and I strongly urge you to support the resolution for Clipper Cove planning 180331. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Romel Barrientos. I'm a U.S. Sail instructor for 30 years. Taught at TIS 2013-14 as a full-time instructor, and also I was the principal race officer. Besides the youth program, the adult program, there's also the visual impaired people that I've taught there, and to take that area away from them, it's going to be a big loss because I trained them for the Paralympics. And it's just a safe place to train for beginner sailors. So if that's gone, it's pretty hard to find a place to teach on the bay. So I just want to let you guys know that. So if the marina's there, basically safety's gone. Thank you.
Paul Zingaro. I'm a slip holder at Treasure Island Marina presently. I see lots of youth sailors. Every day I'm down there, and I'm always glad to see that happen. I just want to point out that this venue is unique in San Francisco Bay. There's no other place like it. Small boaters will really have no other place like it in the Bay, and it should be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Heineken. I'm here as the volunteer Cal Berkeley sailing coach. I also say that I'm a retired physician at San Francisco VA Medical Center. And 8 years ago, when I cut back there, I started coaching at Cal. So I have a lot of experience in the Cove with youth, if we call college kids youth, and the high school kids that also come to practice with us. And as Robbie said, we need a windward-leeward environment. The Cove is set up ideally now. It can tolerate a slightly larger marina in the windward side, but it can't be filled as a giant boat parking lot. I would also point out that a lot has been made over the years, that agreements have been made. But I think from an outside point of view, it looks like TISC has been involved in asymmetric negotiations. You've got a strong developer with a lot of financial backing behind it, and you've got a volunteer organization that takes care of little kids in San Francisco. And so agreements that were made in the past were not necessarily done symmetrically. The races that we do for sailing are important, but there are also dragon boat races that happen that use the entire length of the Cove. And I think it's important that all of the other recreational users of the Cove have access to this unique area. We are a maritime city, and we need to teach that to our youth. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Valerie Santori. My husband Dave. We've lived in San Francisco, our family, since before 47 in the same house, and we've come along and done some sailing activities, worked with high school sailing programs. I've been a volunteer at TISC several times, and having run a high school program, I can tell you that I've always been very envious of the facilities, even though they don't have running water, and there's some other little things that they could use. They've got the space that they need and the safety that they need in order to run a successful program, and they have made the most of it. And this is really important because kids who come through these sailing programs learn to trust each other, and they learn to overcome their fears, all kinds of fears, fears of water, starting with, and fears of people that don't look like them. TISC is really good at pulling the community together. My high school kids were like that too. We put Lowell kids with Mission kids, and they're still bonded after all these years. I mean, it's the foundation of our community in San Francisco. If you want to represent the community, then you need to stand behind the community programs and not just sell out to some pretty boats. Thank you.
I will call a few more speaker cards then. Jonathan DeLong, Eileen Boken, Daniel Franco, Arnold Thompson, Hunter Cutting, Sunny Allen, Dwayne Eaton, Rebecca Evans, Paul Manning, and Hans Wu.
Hi, my name's Connie Channon. I'm here to support a much smaller configuration of the marina that's proposed. I've been a boat holder, a slip owners holder at TI Marina for the last 8 years, and we sail on a 36-foot boat. Every weekend there are boats coming in, anchoring out from other parts of the bay. We typically have to come in and out of the cove, maneuvering around the sailing center's boats, and we have a small boat configured, comparatively. Right now, the marina's proposed, there's 8 slips at the last iteration I saw of it at 40 feet, and the rest are 40, 50, 60, and 70-foot mega yachts coming into a small cove, sharing the cove, depending on the time they come in, with the sailing center's boating situations when they're running races or doing their programming. So, which seems to me presents a very dangerous situation just because of the size of the boats that are coming in. So please don't give away this gem of a cove to big developers for mega yachts in the middle of the bay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jonathan DeLong, born and raised in San Francisco, and I learned to sail in Clipper Cove. I've also sailed thousands of miles around California, and I currently live on a 50-foot sailboat in Oakland. And I mentioned that for context, but one thing that's not mentioned here, aside from the excellent points brought up by the last speaker about the danger of ingress and egress of large boats, alongside the small sailing school boats, which I experience on a regular basis, it's terrifying sailing along those small boats, is that the Clipper Cove is a resource for protected anchorages that you don't have anywhere else in San Francisco. So the cove isn't just the area where the footprint is going to be of the marina. I'm here in support of this resolution and of a much smaller footprint because the footprint of the marina as it's proposed now is one of the only places that other boats can anchor in the cove. The cove is largely shallow. So if we look at protected anchorages around San Francisco Bay, this is unique. And once it's gone from the public trust, it'll never come back. So I'm here to support your resolution. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Daniel Franco, and I am in a union. I'm a boater, and I vote. And I see that there's members of the building trades here. I'm sure they're going to tell you about this creates jobs. I have sort of a counterpoint to that. Because I just learned about this meeting, my remarks are not in any way cleared by the officers of my union. I want to be clear, I'm speaking only for myself. So please note that the building trades don't speak for all unions, and their short-term job bump will cause long-term harm to members of my union. Please don't let this project happen. Just because it took a long time to craft, well, it was dumb in the past, it's dumb today. A note on the dredging issue. I believe the number that was thrown around was $250,000. And from my quick math, that would dredge the harbor maybe once. I think you should question them harder on that issue. I know I did an event on Alcatraz a couple years back, almost a decade ago. It cost us $11,000 an hour to rent a barge and a crane. I'm going to say that again. I want to really make sure you hear me. $11,000 an hour, and they're saying $250,000 will help them dredge all the way into the future. I just don't see it. I think the math is faulty. And finally, while I'm sad that only 2 representatives are in the room to hear this, I think it's important. This is one of those votes. Not everything that comes before you is ultimately all that important, but this one is a career ender. If you vote to let these proposals go forward, you should update your resume because the city's not going to stand for this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sunny Allen, and I'm here representing public recreation and the Raft Up community in the Bay in support of the proposal to protect Clipper Cove. And I just want to start out by explaining a little bit more about what it really means, like what raft ups are in Clipper Cove, by describing really quickly to you the very first raft up I ever went to 5 years ago. And I got dropped off on Treasure Island, and then you have to hike up this hill. And as you're hiking up the hill, you look to your left, and you can see. I saw like this circle of like 20 boats all tied together, and then you make your way up the hill, and you find this little path, and then there's a staircase that leads down to the beach. And once you go down this rickety staircase to the beach, you can see all of the boats in front of you, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get to them. And then a stranger actually came up to me with a little dinghy, and he said, "Are you trying to get to the boats?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, I'll take you." And he said, "Which boat are you supposed to be on?" And I said, "I don't even know where my friend is or which boat is hers." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll just put you on one of the boats." And it ended up taking me, the boat that I was supposed to be on was 12 boats over from the one I got dropped off on. So I had to climb across and like jump across 12 boats before I even got where I was supposed to be. And by the time I got to my friend's boat, I had made like 6 or 7 new friends that I consider family to this day. And through that community in Clipper Cove, like I took my very first sailing lessons. I'd never been on a boat before then, and and it's specifically because of the way that Clipper Cove has protected calm waters that enables beginning sailors to figure out what's going on there. And since then, I have over a month straight of time in open ocean outside the sight of land. I've been so far out from the coast of Hawaii outside of land that the closest people to our boat were people passing over our heads on the internet.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Schreier. I'm one of the original members of Washed Up Yacht Club that started about 6 years ago with about 10 members and now has over 1,000 members. We meet out there every month. As Sunny said, we tie our boats up together. These boats are also our homes, and we open our homes to people that want to join us. We do this every month, and Clipper Cove is, aside from a spot in the Oakland estuary, the only place we can safely tie our boats up to create a raft up. We, as a community, what we do with our group, we reduce the barrier to entry for everyday residents, people that are interested in boating. Boating really looks like it's an out-of-reach thing for the elite, and it doesn't have to be. And we make it available to people, much like the Sailing Center does for kids. We create for other people our age and younger. We've had 4 marriages out there. We've built floating platforms in order to hold ceremonies. We had a band play out there once. We, during our June Raft Up, which is our biggest raft up of the year, we had 68 boats actually tied up together in a circle with floating walkways connecting the boats. Clipper Cove is the Dolores Park of the Bay. And you wouldn't let somebody mow that over for a parking lot. And that's what this new marina will be. It'll be a parking lot. The size of the boats that are going to be housed in this new marina don't get used. And we ask you to please preserve our water park in Clipper Cove for us and for the kids and for the community. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Avery Whitmarsh with the Friends of the Sailing Center. So Treasure Island Sailing Center is the official entity there, and the Friends of the Sailing Center is a group of people who've been involved in the center throughout the years as executive directors, chairs of various programs, coaches, families, things like that. We've been involved since the beginning, basically. So I wanted to correct one thing. The Sailing Center and the Friends of the Sailing Center were not aware of the development plan until 2015, not 2011. So since that came about, there's been a bit of a scramble of what are we going to do about this, because honestly, it will really impact the programs, as everyone has said so far. The regattas need more space, the kids' programs will be impacted. So to reiterate again, Treasure Island Sailing Center had their hands tied and had to support this proposal, because otherwise they would be out of a sailing center, out of their ability to do any of their programs. So they had no choice but to say, yep, we agree with this because this is the best we can get right now. The rest of us, as the Friends of the Sailing Center and people here, understand they don't have to support this proposal, and we don't think that it's the best use of this space. So Treasure Island Sailing Center has proposed a few different options that would be acceptable, and I don't think anyone's saying, or at least most of us are not saying, we don't want the marina to be redeveloped. We just don't want it to be as giant as it's being shown here. So we urge you to accept this resolution and work with the team to come up with some better options. Thank you.
My name's Jeffrey Wiesner. I spend a lot of time at Clipper Cove. I can attest, as many other people have said, that it is a unique area, that it's a safe sailing area, and that the events that go on there don't happen anywhere else. I don't think that we could replicate what we do with the raft ups, and I believe what I've heard about the sailing school, that they will be negatively impacted. I think it's a question of who we're going to serve, not just the number of people, but the types of people. And we are talking about youth And we're also talking about an enormous amount of people who will be impacted, who use it regularly. I also do believe that the large boats will be used less, and that because of their size, they represent less number of people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Newton. I'm a San Francisco resident, retired San Francisco Fire Department lieutenant, and I've been at Clipper Cove since 1992. I've been sailing since I was 15. It made a huge impact on who I am, what I do, and why I'm standing here. And I think I want to protect that for future generations. There's so many resources for kids in this town that have been, how would you say, compressed, codified, and made difficult for them to use. And it's all about getting the kids outdoors, giving them a chance to do the things that I did when I was a kid, a safe place. And in regard to the amount of time this has been in development, they're saying 20 years. Well, there's the genesis of bad ideas. And there was a time that they were going to put a freeway over the Golden Gate Park. And some people here remember the Embarcadero Freeway. That seemed like a good idea at that time. And it lasted for a long time, and the people who put that there, we don't remember their names, but we see their legacy. So I would think that just because it's been a long time doesn't mean that it should go forward. It should be, consider the impact if they had built the freeway over Golden Gate Park. So I urge you to take the route of thinking about the kids, thinking about the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Karen Knowles-Pierce, and I am currently and have been since its inception the chair of the Treasure Island, Yerba Buena Island Citizens Advisory Board. Thank you for this hearing. I urge you to consider passage of this item before you today. I've heard the people who are against it, and we are certainly, all of us who sit on the CAB and have been since 2001, have always been big supporters of the Sailing Center and want to be sure that there is not only space, but sufficient space for them to have these important and exciting times in their lives, learning how to sail and learning how to be a team member, which is important when you sail. I'm a sailor, and when I wrote my letter for consideration for the CAB, the state of Clipper Cove, which was what urged me to do this. When I first saw the original 400 slip, it was large. When it was reconfigured, I was very unhappy with the attenuator because it stuck way out to the south and impeded progress into the cove where people can have a good time. As you've heard, the slips have been reduced by 1/3 over time. Also, another misconception is that every boat owner is a millionaire. All boats don't cost $1 million. All boat owners are not millionaires by any stretch of the imagination. There's also years-long waiting lists in San Francisco for boat owners who are looking for slips. So there's that aspect to consider. Thank you for the opportunity for us to give you our opinions.
Thank you, Ms. Knowles-Pierce. And could you remind us again how many years you've served on the Citizen Advisory Board?
2001
Thank you
was
so
the
much.
first year of meetings.
Yes. Thank you. And thanks also, I remember you speaking in the 2011 DDA presentation. I really appreciate all of your work on this.
Hi, my name is David Corman. Clipper Cove is super important to my friends, as you've heard, the Washed Up Yacht Club and the Raft Up community. And it's a place where on a chilly day on the bay when the sun is out, it's so protected that you can find people swimming because the air is warm and the water is warm and shallow there. And so much community is built there recreationally, and they just improved the beach access and added bathrooms and a parking lot, and it's just such a rich, beautiful place for people to enjoy, and it would be a shame to see it lose a lot of that character. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Arnie Thompson from San Francisco, and I'm here today partially on behalf of my daughter Rebecca, who went through the Treasure Island Sailing School program and is now going to school down in Santa Cruz and couldn't be here today. But she had a wonderful experience with her coaches and her fellow students at the Sailing Center, and wanted me just to put in a good word for the center and all of its wonderful programs, from the very beginner to the more expert programs. And it would be a shame to see any of that diminished. I'm also here as a recreational boater, and it's been pointed out that the west end of Clipper Cove is very calm and the water's a little warmer and shallow, and this provides a wonderful recreational opportunity for any number of boaters and swimmers, kayakers and so forth in the area, where participants, recreational sailors on the bay looking for a place to maybe fix a piece of broken equipment or to stop for an hour or so and have a calm bite of lunch, can just go into Clipper Cove and drop anchor for a little bit, enjoy it for an hour or so, and then be on their merry way. And unfortunately, this marina plan as listed here would greatly diminish that recreational opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Hi, I'm Hunter Cutting. I'm a parent here in San Francisco, and my two boys were both born and raised in the Mission District, and both of them learned to sail out at Clipper Cove as part of the Treasure Island Sailing Center. My older boy actually went on to become a sailing instructor there, and he started a sailing team at Mission High, and he got into college because of that, and he now sails for a public school back east. Clipper Cove is one of the special places in San Francisco. It's by far and away the largest, best protected cove on the bay that we have in the city. It's one of our most valuable public resources. It's protected on three sides from the winds and the currents, and the winds are moderated by the special geography there. We would never give away a third of a regional park to a private luxury resort, and it just makes common sense. We wouldn't give up a third, and we shouldn't give up a third of Clipper Cove to a private luxury marina. There are a lot of inaccuracies in earlier testimony today. I don't want to look backwards, but I'm going to submit documentation so that we can, if we have to, look backwards and discuss those. I'm going to look forwards, and I think that's one of the great things about the resolution introduced today by Supervisor Kim. It's very forward-looking. It establishes principles and criteria for guiding development in the Cove and getting it back on the right track. It's also a very balanced resolution. It doesn't actually prohibit or discourage marina development. It just sort of sets out guidelines for that development so that we can protect one of the most valuable places that we have in San Francisco. Thank you. I urge your adoption of the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Cutting. I'm just going to call the rest of the speaker cards I have on my list. Linda Chen, Dan Ouellette, Ron Kucera, and John Von Tesmar. These are all the speaker cards that I have, so if I did not call your name, please do feel free to line up.
Thank you. My name is Paul Manning, and I am here largely because I'm concerned of the statement that was made earlier that they don't believe this would have an impact. And I can say, as a sailor, I'm actually grown up here in the Bay Area, learned to sail at the age of 6, went to Berkeley, was part of the Cal Sailing Team. In fact, I was the captain of the Cal Sailing Team 35 years ago. And I'm actually volunteering my time as an assistant coach, helping other practices 3 days a week while school is in session. I've seen a lot of the really good programs that are being done in this facility. I think the question is not, do you need to revamp the marina? It's clear that there's an existing one. It's there. It's part of the redevelopment. It makes some sense to replace those docks with new ones. What I object to is you're effectively, if you look at the dimensions of it, you're multiplying that footprint on the order of 900%. It's like 3 times as wide from west to east and 3 times as deep from north to south. That is the problem that I think we have here in terms of the ability to make use of that space. A number of speakers have already made the point that in order to do collegiate sailing, you need a windward-leeward course, which typically the wind is blowing in from the west. The closer you get up towards what is proposed as a large seawall or the wave attenuator, the less your ability to use that space. It has a significant amount of impact on not just the school kids going to practice learning. It has an adverse effect on the sport of collegiate racing, which I think I'd like to point out this weekend, the Cal team actually, as a state club school with very, very little funds from the university, qualified to go to the nationals. They did well at the Pacific Coast Championships. And this is a self-run team that has limited resources, and I think it's important to really put in a voice on their behalf. You know, please think sensibly about the overall balance you've heard from all these people today. Thank you.
Supervisors, my name is Hans Wu. I'm the race director for the California Dragon Boat Association, and we had the honor and privilege of running our international festival at Clipper Cove from 2005 and 2015. And I choose those words carefully, honor and privilege, because it truly is a gem. And, you know, I think that as you consider these things, you shouldn't just be looking at what is its use today, but also its future uses. Like dragon boating, you know, we think embodies the values of the Bay Area. It's exceptionally inclusive. We run the largest youth program in the nation. And while our festival was there, it grew to become the largest competitive dragon boat festival in the U.S. We thought that was an awesome way to highlight the spirit of the Bay Area. In fact, Clipper Cove was developed for the World's Fair to highlight the spirit of the Bay Area. And us being the Bay Area, I think we ought to protect the Bay. You know, I think this idea that there was a comprehensive process over the past 20 years is truly, as my fellow Cal Bears said, asymmetric. We were there for those 11 years. We were never reached out to on this proposal. You know, we were basically just, you know, we found out one day there's a lot of land development. It's a done deal, and we had to go look for a new site. And to tell you how unique this place is, we could not find one in San Francisco that offered the same protections that this gem does. So like when I just step back and boil down, hey, you've had so many people who this benefits, and if you expand this, you know, already there's people at that cove. If you expand it by, 100 or 2, that's the maximum people or number of constituents you can benefit, whereas you probably got way more than that in terms of emails, calls, and speakers just here today. I just don't understand that asymmetric view. So thank you so much for your consideration and support.
Mr. Wu, before you go, where are you doing the dragon race now?
We have moved over to Lake Merritt.
Okay. And why did you move after 2015?
Well, we moved because we had no choice. The development on the land side of this project was going to take away our festival area. I mean, our festival was a two-day...
On the land side.
On the land side. But, you know, we did hear some rumblings of the expansion of the marina. And I'll be honest with you, our hopes were, is once the land side was constructed, perhaps there might be some way we could again come back to this wonderful cove.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Wu.
And thank you, Supervisor Kim, for asking that. If I may, you know, between now and perhaps whenever the lease agreement is up, I would love to see that this dialogue might continue with the Dragon Boat Association and Treasure Island, the project sponsors. I myself, novice, you know, competed in Dragon Boat many times, and I do know and understand how it really is truly a safe place for even beginners to compete. So again, I would love to see that dialogue occur.
I would love to see you come back to Treasure Island as well.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Linda Chu. I'm the festival director for the California Dragon Boat Association. I'm his former board president as well for about 8 years. So as you know, that the California Dragon Boat Association, we're in our 23rd year. And in addition to running the international festival that Hans talked about, we run a very large high school youth program, which I know you're familiar with about 1,000 youth in San Francisco. There are many, many high schools that participate, and some of them have a waiting list. They have 3 crews and a waiting list to get into the program. Right now they practice at Lake Merced, which is a great home for practicing, but in order to get more competitive, they need race opportunities. And Lake Merced it is not sort of the best venue for a rapidly growing race. And so we'd like to keep the option of Clipper Cove open. We could see many events there in the future. Our high school program started as a very simple sort of just scrimmage between Lincoln High School and Washington when two high school teachers challenged each other. Since that date, it's grown into this very large program, and it's grown competitively too, where Lincoln High School now is actually going to Hungary to represent the United States in the World Club Crew Championships. So race opportunities are critical, and as Hans said, we did kind of a region-wide search. I mean, together we looked at every single site in San Francisco, and we could not find another site for our international festival. So we did move to Oakland, which has proven to be a good home, but we run many, many races. Aside from them, I'm also the president-elect of the Mira Loma Elementary School PTA, and well, we just heard about this, and we'll be studying the issue and speaking as a parent of a third grader who hopefully will participate in the Set Sail Learn program next year. We sent one class this year who had a very, very positive experience, and we intend to send the entire fourth grade next year. And I know that teachers wanted to express that they're very supportive of this program. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry I mispronounced your name based on how I read it.
I'm Rebecca Evans. I'm here on behalf of the Sierra Club, and I must say I regret that I'm not a sailor. Sounds like a wonderful community among parents and sailors on the bay. The vision for marina development at Clipper Cove could be and should be improved. Clipper Cove is a really important natural resource for the city and for the bay. The proposal for the developers to take 1/3 of the cove for private luxury marina is an unacceptable sacrifice of public access to the bay. In addition to sacrificing public access, this plan also poses a significant threat to the eelgrass beds in the cove. As you know, eelgrass is a critically important keystone species in the ecosystem of San Francisco Bay. Earlier this year, the California Division of Boating and Waterways issued a troubling report on this marina expansion proposal. The state report revealed for the first time that the proposed marina and wave attenuator may change siltation and sedimentation in the cove, causing the cove to fill in, necessitating annual dredging expenses into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've heard other people testify about that. The Sierra Club notified TIDA about this, and we were also concerned that these factors were not included in the 2006 project report. The failure of the staff to include and review this issue in their staff report is a major omission and a major defect in the findings of fact for TIDA's October 30th decision. We will be submitting some information from the leading biological expert on sealgrass, Keith Merkel, in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Martin Thomas. I'm a sailor on the bay, have been sailing since 1970 on the bay. And I just want to emphasize how, from a sailor's perspective, Clipper Cove is so unique. It's really the only fully protected cove from the Dunbarton Bridge to the Carquinez Bridge. There are other coves, but they lack protection to the degree that Treasure Island Clipper Cove offers it. And having anchored there overnight and for lunch many, many times, it's a unique and wonderful place that we should preserve. The idea of giving 1/3 of it away to a for-profit marina does not appeal to me. I think it would be wonderful if the marina would locate to the east side of Treasure Island, where there's plenty of room and there'd be no objection. And that's where the piers of the Navy used to be. And, you could build a seawall out there, make as big a marina as you wanted. So that would be my proposal. Leave the Treasure Island Clipper Cove alone and move to the east. Thank you very much.
Committee members, thank you. I hope you take some notes on what I'm going to say. I'm a sailboat instructor, U.S. sailing instructor, currently a high school sailing coach, and I've been racing for about 40 years now. The Clipper Cove has dollar signs written all over it. Please preserve Clipper Cove as you would Yosemite. I like to go out, and when I throw out my tent throw out my anchor off for my boat. I throw it out at Clipper Cove. It's peaceful, quiet. I could spend the night there and take off. I could go to Geardale Square and throw out my anchor, but it's quite noisy. Angel Island is another really good place. So please think about Clipper Cove as a sanctuary for boaters. If you go to the ecosystem, Clipper Cove does not have current. It doesn't have a flow. It goes up and down. So there's no flow. If you start throwing in 300 and 400 boats, you're going to get gasoline, you're going to get oil, or you're going to get pollution. The ecosystem will change in the Clipper Cove over time. You also have liveaboards living there. So that's another aspect you have to think about. As for racing, the wind comes from the Golden Gate straight over the little jetty, and it's fairly constant. You start throwing in buildings or boats, like I have learned how to sail Lake Merritt, and I've experienced the high rises, and they change the wind conditions. It's very much like a very nice soccer field. If you start playing soccer with kids, they can handle it. You play soccer with kids in a sandlot field, they're going to start twisting their ankles and breaking things. The same thing with the sailboat. When the wind shifts 20 degrees, if they're not ready for it, they're going to be swimming for a little while. Thank you very much.
Supervisors, hi, my name is Ron Cusera. A lot of the things that I wanted to say about the impact on people's personal lives, the impact on education, the impact on the environment, it's already been said, so I'll just speak a little bit about my own personal presence here. I have a boat at Treasure Island Marina. It's a little 20-foot boat named Whisper. I have another boat that I've sailed the entire coast from Half Moon Bay, San Francisco, down to Cape Horn. And I've sailed about every inch of the coast of North and South America, and I've seen very few places like Clipper Cove. I have seen big mega yacht marinas in places like La Paz and Cabo San Lucas, and places like Costa Rica, Valparaiso, Chile. These are people that don't use their boats. They have money. They're tokens of their wealth. This has been reduced to 313 slips. I think currently at Treasure Island there's 107. Maximum boat size there is, I'm not sure what, 36 or 40 feet. We're talking about a beginning of 40 feet all the way up to 80 feet. It would just clog that natural pearl of an anchorage there. That's about all that I have to say. I hope that you'll act on preserving Clipper Cove as the way it is now. A great place for students, a great place for people to come and enjoy it. The raft up's a lot of fun, and it's a wonderful place. And to speak to that person's point about not all our sailors are millionaires, even though I've been able to do all this, I make far less than the average, the area median income. I have 2 small boats, and I enjoy sailing in places like Clipper Cove. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Catherine Howard, Sierra Club. We support the resolution. I'm going to talk a little bit about eelgrass. Our environment is made up of many small, delicate building blocks that interact to create the natural world. One such building block is a seagrass, with the somewhat unappealing name of eelgrass. Eelgrass is so important to the health of its ecosystem, it is known as a keystone species. If it does not do well, then the lives dependent on it will do poorly. And that is something that happened in the eastern United States in the 1930s when a disease wiped out some of the eelgrass and resulted in the extinction of at least one species and great harm to other ones. In San Francisco Bay, eelgrass provides a place for Pacific herring to lay their eggs, and then a place for diving birds to strip the eggs off for their lunch. Juvenile salmon and Dungeness crabs hide from predators in the meadows. Even the decaying plant materials support the estuary's food web. Eelgrass meadows catch minute particles floating in the water and deposit them on the bay floor, slowly building up the sandy and muddy bottom. Large beds of eelgrass can absorb some shock waves, protecting adjacent shorelines. But eelgrass is also sensitive to water clarity, to changes in currents, to increases or decreases in the sediment it lives in, and to changes in depths of water. The Sierra Club is very worried that the proposed marina development could damage the eelgrass population now living in the cove. The precise impact on the eelgrass beds is not known. Even in public documents, the developers stated that they were not sure of the impact. And therefore, we support a study before the city commits to a marina project. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Von Tesmar. I have been a berth holder at Treasure Island for 9 years. I am certainly in favor of keeping the marina and the existing structure in Clipper Cove the way it is. If there is to be some new development, I would not want to see anything enlarged. With my 21-foot boat, I use it to operate a kite surfing business, and it's been my sole business for 5 years out of the 9 that I've kept the boat there. And kite surfing, as you may know, is a branch of sailing, and sailing is a very important part of the culture in the San Francisco Bay Area. And if a large marina does go into place that has these minimal boat length restrictions, or just if it's a new structure that's going to cost more, it's going to be difficult for me to keep running my kite surfing business. So thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisors Michael Terrio, San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council. I'm actually not going to talk about jobs, and I'm certainly not going to threaten your political careers. I do understand something about asymmetric negotiations, having engaged in them many times in the past. I've sat down nose to nose with multinational corporations. When you come out of those negotiations, you have a deal. And I realize you, as the members of the Board of Supervisors, were not involved in that deal, but the Sailing Center was. I would ask them to respect that deal. Certainly we all thought there was one when we came through the hearings at the Treasure Island Development Authority a couple of years ago. With regard to the resolution itself, it is mom and apple pie, much of it. Respect for youth sailing and support for youth sailing, unarguable. Preservation of eelgrass beds, unarguable. And Supervisor, actually, you know what eelgrass is, having kayaked into that cove and picnicked on the beach and before the Sailing Center was even there. And yet, that resolution, there are items in it that will be viewed as binding you, even if they are not precisely binding, when you do ultimately negotiate the lease agreement for the marina. And so I think it's important to be very careful about what exactly is binding you in this thing, what provisions are in there that you have to feel obliged to honor when time comes for those leases. The developer has, it seems to me, rationally asked for a continuance so that they can work with the community and with you on working out those items that will be viewed by some as binding. And I think it's reasonable of you to grant them that continuance. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Ashley Wallace. I'm a sailor out of Emery Cove Marina. And I, like many others, just want to say how important the Cove is to us. It's a gathering place for many in a city that's becoming increasingly unaffordable. It's a really great place for people to be able to afford to go there and meet up with friends and have their kids kayak and swim. Also, supporting sailors is supporting a renewable energy sport. We might use fossil fuels to move in and out of safely marinas, but once we're out of the channel, we're hoisting our sails and using wind. I think that's important. I would also second the guy that brought up the dredging. Emery Cove just had a big dredging project, and it cost a lot of money. I think it was $10,000 an hour to rent the machinery. Also, the soil, if it doesn't test properly, you then have to take it outside of the Golden Gate Bridge, and that will cost over $1 million. So I, too, would just check into those numbers that they were talking about and make sure that they're actually affording how much dredging would actually cost. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Army Morgan with Operating Engineers Local 3. I'd like to thank the committee for their time on the Land Use Committee. And Operating Engineers, we'd like to, persuade you to support the continuance of the resolution. I know it's kind of tough on the sailors and everything, and I don't want to get into that, but I'm sure they can, probably reach a happy medium or work it out, But we were in favor of the continuance to do the resolution. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the Land Use Committee. My name is Timothy Reif. I'm a field representative with the Carpenters and a native San Franciscan. I'd like to ask you to continue this so that this can be worked out between the developer and the community, and some type of resolution can come up that benefits everybody. I'm here with a number of working carpenters today who would like to go to work on this when this does get passed and it comes to fruition. Thank you very much.
Speak now. Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Michael Guo. Clipper Cove is a very beautiful and special place. When I was in high school, I watched the dragon boat races there for 3 years until they moved to Oakland. And not only that, Clipper Cove is a place where a lot of people make great memories. And Clipper Cove is not the place for luxury developers to make a quick buck. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marina Binsack. I'm a resident of District 11. I am also not a sailor, but I grew up in the city, and I did not have this opportunity when I was growing up. And I usually get pretty emotional when I'm up here just talking about equity issues. So I just decided to keep it pretty dry and discuss what would occur if this were to be taken to, well, when it does go to BCDC. I just went ahead and jotted down a few policies in their Bay Plan. In regards to the impact that this would have on the youth programs, I urge you to look at the recreation policy, specifically policy number 1, which says that diverse and accessible water-oriented recreational facilities should accommodate a broad range of water-oriented recreational activities for people of all races, cultures, ages, and income levels. And I think a number of the speakers here have spoken to that as well. In terms of the impacts on the eelgrass, I urge you to look at the section on tidal marshes and tidal flats, specifically policy 1 in the Bay Plan. It says that filling, diking, and dredging projects that would substantially harm tidal marshes, this includes the eelgrass, should be allowed only for purposes that provide substantial public benefits and only if there is no feasible alternative. And finally, I would urge you to look at the policies in the Bay Plan regarding access. There's an entire section on public access, an entire section on appearance, design, and scenic views. I don't think we've discussed how this would impact the views. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Alex Landsberg with the San Francisco Electrical Construction Industry, which is a labor management partnership of IBEW Local 6 and the San Francisco Electrical Contractors Association. Just wanted to urge our support for continuance on this thing. It's clear that the sailing community is concerned, and it's equally clear that the city's development partner really wants to try to find a way to make this thing work. So I encourage a week-long continuance so they can continue the dialogue. Specifically to the sailing community, I'm a District 10 resident, live right across the street from the bay in India Basin. I want to invite dragon racers and all other human-powered boat folks down to India Basin, where we also have a sheltered cove and wonderful water and great weather. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Thank you for your time. My name is Jesus Villalobos, President of Labor's Local 261, and I'm here to ask you on behalf of over 5,000 members for your support in passing this resolution. Thank you.
Eileen Boken, I'm the president of Sunset Parkside Education and Action Committee, also known as SPEAK. SPEAK has been an active voice in the neighborhood for almost half a century. SPEAK is here to support the Set, Sail, Learn STEM program, as it is consistent with the city's stated goal of keeping families here in San Francisco. The Set Sail Learn STEM program benefits the students of Feinstein, Lawton, Ulloa, Jefferson, and Francis Scott Key elementary schools. Speak would like to thank the legislation's sponsors and co-sponsors for their continued commitment to keeping families here in San Francisco. Thank you.
Supervisors, it's Jay Wallace again, if I may have one more minute just to wrap up. I want to just say to the audience and to the supervisors that we hear your concerns. We respectfully would request a week or so continuance so that we can continue to work with our colleagues in the community to hopefully come up with a solution that satisfies everybody's needs. As you know, we've always had an open door policy. We will continue to do so, and we continue to look forward to working with all of the members of the board and the community on a solution that will work for Clipper Cove. So thank you for the indulgence here.
Through the chair, Mr. Wallace, while you were here, because I finally took an opportunity to read the letter that you submitted on Friday, and I just want to go to your second paragraph where you ended with the line, the 400-slip marina plan approved by the Board of Supervisors has been in place for more than a decade. Could you explain that sentence?
Yes, I was referring to the 2006 EIR in which the Board of Supervisors approved the project.
A study.
Supervisor,
We've never approved a 400-slip marina plan.
There's never been a lease approval, that's correct.
I can't express my immense dismay at a complete lie being written to the board. There are members of this board who have not been on this board as long as I have, and they will get this letter, and they will be incredibly confused as to why we approved a 400-slip marina plan, and then I'm submitting this resolution. It boggles my mind that a project sponsor as sophisticated as a Treasure Island Enterprise would submit a blatant lie to the 11 members of the Board of Supervisors. We never approved a 400-slip marina plan, and it has not been in place for over a decade. We studied it. There's a big difference between an approval and a study. Is that correct?
There's a big difference between an approval and a study, and the study was approved 11-0 by the Board of Supervisors.
And that is very different from a plan. And to say that there were no complaints as to its size or location, it's because it was a study. There was no approval. There was no project for them to complain about.
Supervisor, I'm certainly not going to argue with you from the dais, but I would
Thank
say
you,
one
Mr.
thing.
Wallace.
You know that to be the case.
Thank you. Sorry, just so the members of the audience, please refrain from clapping or any other noise. We do generally have this policy. We've been a little lax today, but let's keep to that. Let's resume public comment.
Hi, my name is Lotus Yi Fong, and I moved to San Francisco from a landlocked state, New Mexico, and did not have a chance to learn to swim, much less to sail. But I have 3 grandchildren that I hope will be able to do dragon boat and also have a 20-foot boat named Whisper. Because my grandson said, Papa, can we afford to have a boat? He stands at Pier 39 and he looks at those boats. We were there yesterday, and for other parents and grandparents, up in the back of Pier 39 on the top level, there's a store called Think Outside the Box. And it's got wonderful little creative puzzles and games for kids to learn to think. And you can see the boats from their wall window. My concern after 35 years of being in this city and watching the kind of money that has been coming in the last decade is, there's a movie called If You Build It, They Will Come. I believe it's that baseball movie, right? I'm not sure that's true here, because if you look at the out-of-state developer that was brought in for the Hunters Point shipyard and the toxicity problems with the shipyard and now Treasure Island, I'm not sure that this mega yacht market is going to be there, and that we should be making decisions based on people who you know, as someone else said, you know, they're birthing, marinaing in other locations. The best suggestion was about locating it on the west side or somewhere else. It doesn't need to be Clifford Cove. I think the other developer, his other business at the Ferry Building also failed, and we should.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Janet Royce, and my son learned to sail at Treasure Island, and he became a sailing instructor, and his livelihood is probably going to be on the water. So we're very, very grateful for that opportunity for him. I wanted to just mention that it's very important that this passes today. And also mention that this resolution is supported by Save the Bay, U.S. Sailing, the national governing body for sports sailing, the Sierra Club, and the San Francisco Baykeeper. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the public, I'd like to ask the chair to close public comment on this item. All right, thank you. We'll now close public comment. Supervisor Kim? So, colleagues, I just want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank all the members of the public for coming out to speak today. I have to tell you that this was a very complex issue that took me and my staff quite a bit of time to study and come up to speed on. It's certainly not my area of expertise, nor have I ever sailed in our bay or at Clipper Cove. But I just want to say that over the past 2.5 years that I have been incredibly moved by both the stories that I've heard of people, particularly our youth and our families, using the Clipper Cove, and certainly Supervisor Avalos himself and his family, and just how unique this cove is to San Francisco and to our public recreation and our public education opportunities. And a couple of things that I'll just say about the resolution that is before us today is that we don't actually mandate the number of berths or the size that will finally come before the Board of Supervisors for approval, but that we put forward a series of principles that we would like to be a part of the proposal before it comes to the board. Certain elements such as ensuring that we don't diminish existing public use and public recreation and public education on Clipper Cove, that we study and not harm critical, important eelgrass beds, which I've certainly learned a lot about over the last year, or diminish the water depth, that these are the principles and analysis that the Board of Supervisors would like to see before a final project plan comes before the Board of Supervisors for final approval. So this does not set what is going to be at Clipper Cove, and so I don't see a need to continue this for a week. I just also have to say, as the office that has been mediating this conversation for 2.5 years, I'm really not quite sure what an additional 7 days will do for this resolution. I had really been undetermined in my position on this issue for close to 2 years because I really was hoping that the stakeholders would work this out without our office having to intervene and take a position. But after 3 years, at a certain point, you have to make a call, and you have to move forward with what you think is going to be the best set of principles and project moving forward at Clipper Cove. I don't see a consensus coming forward in the next 7 days, and so what I'm putting forward is a series of principles and analysis that I'd like to see within the proposed Clipper Cove project plan that will come before the Board of Supervisors. Again, this is just a floor. It is not the details, and so that will get worked out between the stakeholders before the proposed lease comes before the Board of Supervisors. So I don't think that we are tying our hands in any way. That being said, there is another 7 days before this resolution comes before the full Board of Supervisors. So if the project sponsor and TIDA would like to meet with stakeholders over the next 7 days, please do so. If there are amendments that stakeholders agree to, I will certainly consider them for amendment at the full board. A couple of final things that I just want to say. I have been a little
I will say that I understand and I'm sympathetic to the project sponsor in their concerns about allowing interim use before development because of their concern of being able to fully idealize or realize the plan actually that they had originally proposed 10, 15 years ago. But just as the interim use, and in this case I'm talking about the Treasure Island Sailing Center, should not rely on its own continuance and future just purely based on the success of your program, because we have never agreed to, in some ways, a permanent program here at Clipper Cove, neither should the project sponsor have relied on any conversations or studies as to what this Board of Supervisors would finally agree to 10, 15, 20 years later. In many ways, that is the nature of the business of this work. Neither parties could have relied on either their existing use or on any existing conversations or study to say that this is the final project that should come before and is the best use of the site. So that being said, I think, I ask my colleagues to support this resolution as is. I do always encourage continued dialogue over the next 7 days. Finally, I just have to express my deep and utter dismay and disappointment with the letter that was submitted by the project sponsor to the Board of Supervisors. I just think it is completely unacceptable to lie to this board. This board has never approved a 400-slip marina in 2006, and it did not approve it in 2011. And to say that this has been in place for over a decade, it just boggles the mind and is a bit insulting to the intelligence of the members of this board. So thank you, colleagues, for hearing this issue. Thank you again to the members of the public. I have learned a tremendous amount about sailing and eelgrass beds and many other things, and I just appreciate your advocacy and passion. I look forward to seeing a final resolution on this issue, but I do really do support the set of principles that we have put forward in this resolution. And so, colleagues, I ask for your support, and so I'd like to move this forward with recommendation to the full board.
Thank you. And can we do that without objection? Okay, we'll do that without objection. All right, thank you. All right. Now we have another long item before us. Madam Clerk, item 3, please.
Allegedly long. Item number 3 is an ordinance amending Division 1 of the Transportation Code to establish a procedure for Board of Supervisors review of certain municipal transportation agency decisions.
Thank you. And I did want to announce that we are also now joined by Supervisor Peskin. And I'm going to turn it over to the sponsor of this legislation, Supervisor Safai.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Chair Tang. Just to give a little background on this item, just to talk a little bit about what this is all about. I'll just wait a minute for folks to clear out. But essentially, we started a conversation, Supervisor Peskin and I, about a year ago with some general parameters. One was some frustration with the level at which the requests that come into members of the Board of Supervisors about issues with regard to the SFMTA and the MTA in general, and then the understanding and the way that the city charter is set up and the way that the the current structure is that we essentially have no authority over the SFMTA. And the voters made that decision. We went through a series of legislative moves and charter amendments in 99, 2007. But embedded in the charter was also the ability, and as Supervisor Peskin pointed out when we also started this conversation, is that we've never exercised certain aspects of the charter that the voters gave us. And that's the piece of legislation that you see in front of us today. I'm going to let Supervisor Peskin talk about some of the points that he made, but I think that in its inception about separation of powers and the way of removing politics from the SFMTA, the intent was never to create one final authorizing area. It was more about trying to remove politics, but in effect, we ended up putting one elected official in charge of by appointment power for the commissioners, as well as the recommendation of the executive director and otherwise. So what we had attempted to do in our conversation was essentially begin a conversation about how, at least from my perspective, how some of the micro issues, how some of the neighborhood affecting issues, the smaller, more micro issues in terms of whether it's a stop sign, whether it's traffic calming, whether it's pedestrian safety, whether it's Vision Zero, or under all of those principles, whether it's permit parking, meter parking, some of the bike stations, residential permit parking. These are the things that I have heard about the most, more frequently than any other issue that comes up as an elected member of the Board of Supervisors, but the frustration lied in the fact that we ultimately had no say or authority over any of those decisions. Some would say that's good. Some would say that there needed to be some reforms. So Supervisor Peskin and I got together and we started this conversation first about a charter amendment, and we've put that on hold, but essentially the charter amendment would say we would keep members of the commission, but we would split the agency into two parts. One that would be more the Department of Sustainable Streets that would deal with some of these more micro issues. One that would deal with taxi and muni issues. And then the two agencies would effectively report to the same governing body. And I want to recognize some members of the SFMTA Commission. We started conversations with them recently, and I appreciate the fact that they've come here today to be part of this conversation. But kind of bringing it full circle, we decided to pull back. We've asked the SFMTA, and we've heard for them to make some reforms. They're going to present on those reforms today as it pertains to how each member of this Board of Supervisors will interact with the SFMTA, and in terms of staffing, in terms of engineers and planners and so on, as well as what they see going forward. And then we'll get into some of the details of this legislation. But essentially, it allows us to have some review over some areas of concern that often come up the most when they are highlighted to us as members of the Board of Supervisors. So we have the review under this legislation to discuss green, blue, yellow, white zones, street sweeping parking restriction, taxi stands, shuttle zones, tour bus zones. So essentially some of the temporary stopping zones, parking time limits for meters, also the residential parking permit program, stop signs, as well as car share parking and van pool parking, and on-street parking restriction, motorcycle parking only, and then some vehicle size over height of 6 feet, oversized vehicle restrictions, which is a big issue in my district, motorcycle parking only, compact vehicle parking or marking stall designations, and then restrictions of ISCOT permitting issues. Those are some of the things that already, and I just want to be clear, the voters of San Francisco already gave the members of the Board of Supervisors the ability to exercise this authority, but we never exercised that authority. And so this is an attempt to move that forward and essentially balance out some more of the review. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to be hearing all of these things. It still requires there to be a threshold of members of the Board of Supervisors to sign on to have a hearing of an issue that's maybe a decision that's been made within the last 60 days. But I think that's an important authority then to transfer over to members of the Board of Supervisors, and so that's why we put this forward. I want to hand it over to my colleague, Supervisor Peskin, if that's okay, Chair Tang, to allow him to say some opening remarks.
Chair Tang, Supervisor Safai, and soon to be joined by Supervisor Kim, thank you for that introduction, and I've enjoyed collaborating with you and your staff and my staff on this matter. I just want to start by thanking the SFMTA and particularly Ed Riskin for engaging with us as this has evolved over time, as well as individuals and organizations ranging from the San Francisco Transit Riders Union, Walk SF, Save Muni, the Bicycle Coalition, and the hundreds of people who have weighed in with varying perspectives on the matter. I want to put this in a historical context, which Supervisor Safai touched on. In the beginning, Muni was a property of the Public Utilities Commission of San Francisco, not to be confused with the State Public Utilities Commission that has allowed TNCs to run roughshod over San Francisco, but the purveyor today of our water, sewer, and municipal electricity. And Muni was a property of that organization for many, many years. If you will recall Mayor Willie Brown's contest wherein he attempted to walk down Market Street faster than the underground got there in the late 1990s, the issue du jour, while homelessness was still up there, was on-time Muni arrivals. And in the late 1990s, 1999 to be precise, in an unlikely moderate progressive coalition, the then supervisors Tom Amiano and Gavin Newsom collaborated on what was Proposition E, which created the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency and gave it a level of autonomy, a level of funding, and made it quite independent from the board's budget process insofar as it required a supermajority of the board to reject the budget and did not give us line item authority over that budget. When I was first elected and took office on January 8th of 2001, I don't think there's anybody around who remembers it. Maybe Jim Lazarus does from his days as a deputy city attorney. We used to have at this committee, at the Land Use and Transportation Committee, a huge number of items related to increasing a yellow zone 20 feet, adding a stop sign, all of which in those days went to a separate entity, which was the what the heck was it called? The Parking and Traffic Commission, which was a separate entity, and all of those items had to be approved by this board. The 1999 Prop E experiment went on for a controversial decade, and in the late 2000s, 2007 to be precise, we were at a turning point, which came to me as president of the board in those days, and we could go down two very distinct roads. One was to take all of the power back and reinsert the legislative branch, and the other was to make it more autonomous and actually take away the remaining powers the legislative branch had. I chose the latter. That became Proposition A, which was put on as a charter amendment on the 2007 ballot. It was very controversial in those days. As a matter of fact, one of San Francisco's leading civic lights, a gentleman named Don Fisher, opposed it with hundreds of thousands of dollars on the theory that it was going to advocate against car traffic and for public transportation. Mr. Fisher, God rest his soul, lost in that matter. And the theory that I think many of us had at the time, including Spur and transportation advocates, as Supervisor Safai said, was that we were going to depoliticize the transportation functions of San Francisco, and we were going to take out the meddling supervisors and mayors. And that, while it's kind of counterintuitive for elected officials to give up power, was the theory that I subscribed to. As it turned out, the Board of Supervisors exempted itself from the process. But as Mr. Riskin, I'm not going to put you on the spot, attest to, it became a solely owned branch of the vicissitudes of whoever the mayor was at the time, and checks and balances be damned. And I watched that in many incarnations, whether it was San Francisco, and I mean no ill will towards our former mayor, accommodating all too readily Google buses or TNCs, and none of that, regardless of what we heard from taxi drivers who were being driven out of work or from others was within the realm of the legislative branch to discuss, have any influence over. And so when Supervisor Safai came expressing these concerns, I said something that's a little unlikely. I said, I help break it, I want to help fix it. And that resulted in the charter amendment.
That was the cleaner version.
Having said all of that, I was reminded that a decade ago, I actually introduced an ordinance which, but for the bell ringing on my then two-term limit, would likely have been passed, which used the specific carve-out set forth in Proposition A, the 2007 Charter Amendment, that would have allowed certain items to be appealed to the board. That item never came forward for a hearing. Here we are a decade later, and that is before us today. Interestingly enough, it is in some ways modeled on a provision that the board passed a decade and a half ago, more than that, 16, 17 years ago, on how conditional uses from Mr. Sider's department could be brought before this board. In the old days, and this was manifestly unjust, only property owners within 300 feet of a project receiving conditional use could appeal to the Board of Supervisors. And subsequently, I passed legislation that actually gave the board the authority to be proxies for people who did not own real property, whether they were commercial tenants or residential tenants or concerned neighbors outside of the 300-foot zone. And that required 5 members of the Board of Supervisors to subscribe to an appeal to bring it before this body so those issues could be heard. I was actually talking to Supervisor Safai earlier today, and he and I were trying to recall how many times since he had been supervisor, which has been how long now?
Year and a half.
Seems like forever. Sorry, that was a joke. And I think we could only think of 2 times that the board had actually used that authority in the last year and a half to bring an appeal forward. But those have been actually very important policy matters that have actually are now leading to changes in the way, in one case, that we deal with demolition controls. So I am hopeful that this is seen in the way that it's intended, which is not to go back to the days of micromanaging everything that Mr. Risk and you and your very able and competent staff do, but in order to re-inject the kind of dialogue that A, makes us healthier, that reinstills the checks and balances that, if they're done right, make us better, and B, also allow our constituents who think that they are electing people who have a modicum of influence over these decisions to realize that we actually can insert ourselves in the process when it's manifestly important. To that end, I think there are a number of changes that we want to make today, and I want to speak to those. But I really welcome this conversation. This is not in any way, at least coming from this supervisor, meant to walk away from or in any way undermine our transit first policies, which I absolutely adhere to and the voters have spoken on. It's about really making this dialogue more fruitful for everybody. And I do want to say one thing that I've said to Director Riskin repeatedly, which is actually this conversation has in many ways already achieved what it was meant to achieve, which is that the level of dialogue between you and your staff and this body has, Mr. McGuire, thank you, been so much better in the last few months. And I get it. It's not that you were ignoring us or belittling the Board of Supervisors. You've got a really tough, complicated set of challenges in a world that is evolving very quickly, whether it's, you name it, electric scooters, chariots, Google buses, and Central Subways and Van Ness BRTs, but this has gotten your attention, and I think that has been extremely helpful. So I want to acknowledge that. I do have a number of specific questions, and I'm happy to bring those up when the time is right.
And through the chair, I just want to jump back in. I just want to make a couple more points. I wanted to hand it over to Supervisor Peskin because I think we came together on this from two separate angles, and I want to thank him from the beginning because I went and talked to him, and as he said takes responsibility for some of the, and sometimes you can't anticipate how things will ultimately come out, but I will say literally daily I receive emails, calls, concerns, and when I'm out in the community, people come up and approach me about these issues that we're talking about today. And it has been, for the past year and a half that I've been in office, it has been extremely frustrating to have to say to people, we absolutely have no authority. That's not the way that the structure is set up. And so I think people don't understand that. And that's been the consensus from many members of the Board of Supervisors that I've talked with, Supervisor Tang, Supervisor Breed, Supervisor Peskin, and others as we've had this conversation. And I do want to acknowledge, since we proposed our charter amendment, there has been a significant change in the behavior of the SFMTA. And I appreciate Director Reskin and Tom McGuire and others, Dylan, for really working aggressively to try and change the behavior and be more responsive on these issues. But it goes to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish today is really about, if you take on all of the criticism, if you take all of the heat, if you take all of the concerns, but yet we have no authority, and you say that over and over again, people don't understand that. And it makes sense to me that we have limited authority that Supervisor Peskin had worked on back in 2007, and it seems to me this is the time to exercise that. But I did want to acknowledge, as he did, that the SFMTA has made some definitely some changes, and we're going to ask them to present on the restructuring today. So through the chair, do you want
Supervisor Peskin, do you have a comment first?
And before you say that, I want to talk about how radical Proposition A actually was, which is Proposition A, which could have only gotten on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors, actually created another legislative branch of government, right? So when we gave the MTA Commission, or I should say the voters gave the MTA Commission, the ability to legislate, that was a pretty amazing thing. I mean, it's very rare that a bunch of elected officials actually cede power to a bunch of unelected officials. And so it's important for me to say that. I mean, there are second acts in American life, because here I am again a decade later getting to talk about it. And I'm saying that on the eve of this board being asked tomorrow to reconfirm, because the mayor appoints, the board confirms, two members of the commission, and I'm not pointing this at staff, who at least in this supervisor's case, these individuals have not even reached out to my office. They may have reached out to other offices. Actually, after I brought this up to the mayor's liaison to the board today, which I didn't have to do, but I did, one of those two members reached out. But we are the confirming authority for a shadow legislative branch of government, and those members feel so autonomous that they don't even have the courtesy or respect to reach out to see whether or not they're going to be confirmed, and again, this is not pointed to staff, because I think staff has made marked changes in the last few months, but it does speak volumes about the attitude of some of these individuals who think that there are no checks and balances. So I just had to get that off my chest.
Okay, and we're back to Supervisor Safai. Are we going to get to the departments?
Yes, so no, I wanted to talk about a couple of changes that were made, and I want to read them into the record. One of them was we removed the public review of 50 residents living near the location of SFMTA final decision. That was removed from the legislation. We added the review of final decisions on stop signs, and we added in an exemption of Class 2 and Class 4 bike lanes from Board of Supervisors review. So those are what you have in front of us today. And then we have a few more amendments, and so I don't know if the chair would like us to talk about amendments now, or we wanted to go to public comment or go to the presentation.
Maybe you could do a little highlight of what you're thinking in terms
so,
of changes.
So one of them refers to the definition of a development project and amending the definition of a final MTA decision. So, and this is a specific case because in development projects that go before the Planning Commission, there is the opportunity for Planning Commission review, Planning Department review during the entitlement process, and then the ability to appeal already to the Board of Supervisors. And once that has happened and we make a final determination, we don't necessarily need an additional review from this body again. So that was something that the Planning Department worked with us just in the last 48 hours. And so I'm okay with that amendment. And then the other was, I think Supervisor Peskin's office highlighted that, and we were working with Lee from his staff, who's done a tremendous job, and Kathy from my staff, but has also done a tremendous job. But the idea that the members of the Board of Supervisors would have a filing fee of $600, and so we asked them to remove that fee, and so we will, and they agreed to that. So we will be talking about that amendment. And those are the only two that I have at this particular moment. And I know that Supervisor Tang might have something, but we can, I'm happy to proceed with the presentation, or if you wanted to.
Well, it looks like it's the Supervisor Peskin and
I'm happy to hear the presentation, and I have not actually talked to Supervisor Safai on this, but I assume that what you're talking about is on page 1, inserting a definition of bicycle lane.
Correct.
And at line 18, that would be
right.
the insertion of
Right.
bicycle lane, period. This is
Class
definitions, a Class 2 bikeway or Class 4 separated bikeway or cycle track.
Correct.
And insofar as that would then be defined on page 2 at line 12, we would actually capitalize bicycle lane, capital B, capital L, because it would be a defined term. I have some other amendments I would like to suggest, but I am happy to hear the presentation. I concur with regard to the filing fee, and particularly insofar as what Supervisor Safai suggested, which is that only a number of members of the board, as with the conditional use appeal procedure that I outlined earlier, could bring the appeal. I think the notion of eliminating the language at page 4, line 20, with regard to the page 4, line 20, with regard to the requirement of a filing fee in the amount of $597 should be stricken.
Yep.
And then I have some additional amendments, but I will actually only one additional amendment, and some questions.
Let's hold that.
Okay. So shall we hear from the department staff now?
We could probably go
Okay.
on all day.
Director Ruskin.
Thank you, Chair Tang, members of the committee, Supervisor Peskin. I appreciate the opportunity. I also appreciate the context and history lesson. I learned a few things that you might have thought I would have known, but I learned something just sitting here today already. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this proposal. I will try to stick to really what the focus of today's hearing was, although there was a lot of discussion already about kind of larger issues and the proposed charter amendment. But I do want to set the stage a little bit and then ask Mr. McGuire to come forward and speak, as you've asked, on changes we've made and then some specific issues with regard to the legislation. So just to start, the legislation, and part of this is for the benefit of the public. I know you all know much of this. This legislation would open up a broad range of SFMTA decisions to the Board of Supervisors for review. And we recognize, as we've already heard, that the city charter endows the Board of Supervisors with the authority to exercise these additional review powers. And in some cases, we feel review of this type may be valuable to helping to ensure that the SFMTA is working in unison with the city's elected leadership toward a shared vision of the future. And Supervisor Peskin referenced private transportation issues a number of times, and we think that is an area where this kind of review would be especially valuable, because these private transportation functions, which largely I would say were not anticipated when Prop A or Prop E were created, certainly beg a lot of much larger city policy discussions. We are, however, concerned about the breadth of decisions that would be subject to another layer of review and the implications that this might have on our ability to deliver vitally important transportation projects on schedule and in accordance with the policy objectives outlined in the city's transportation policy, Vision Zero policy, and climate action plan. And I was pleased to hear the reaffirmation by Supervisor Peskin of the Transit First policy, and perhaps some changes in what's proposed can help us make sure that affirmation is realized. And that's in part because the Transit First policy, I'd say, has never been more important to the city than it is today, as the city is growing and the ways people get around are getting more complex. The streets aren't getting any wider, and we have more people competing for space on them, and we need to figure out how to move people more efficiently, moving more people and fewer vehicles. Thus, we're concerned about unintended consequences that review as is proposed, and there's been some amendments already. What that layer of review, how that could impact transit projects in particular, as we're working toward our new city goal of achieving 80% of trips in the city made by sustainable modes by 2030, concerned about the impact that this additional layer of review will have on our ability to provide high-quality, efficient transit service to Muni riders in particular. Providing an attractive alternative to driving will be vital for us to be able to achieve this 80% goal, which is necessary for a lot of reasons, including the protection of our environment. Furthermore, residents and merchants of San Francisco rely on the SFMTA when it comes to issues related to curb management, and what is already seen as some, including many of you, as a long process could potentially get longer by this legislation, which I don't think is the intent, but would be a practical implication of it. I do want to note that, or just to, I guess, clarify for the record, unless it doesn't go without saying, decisions that the SFMTA staff and ultimately its board of directors are tasked with making can be complex and often technical in nature. They regularly demand difficult trade-offs, which can stir strong emotions by people who are impacted, people in our community. These decisions have implications that relate to mobility, economic vitality, safety, accessibility, equity, and numerous other equally valid considerations. But ultimately, making streets safer for our most vulnerable road users, which are people walking and biking, young people, old people, people with disabilities, they require making difficult decisions and making the streets work better for Muni, for it to perform better, its reliability and its safety likewise require difficult decisions. These decisions, which we make based on professional judgment by trained staff and in accord with our charter responsibilities and city policy, they have impacts that not everybody likes. So recognizing that and want to be clear that we get that. I think it was with the recognition of this, and not to add to the history lesson, that the grand jury's report that led to the formation of the MTA back in the 1990s urged that the operation of the agency be separated from the political process as much as possible. That's advice that I think is still relevant today, and I would very respectfully take a little bit of different perspective on the idea that the agency is subject only to input from the executive branch and not from the legislative branch. I've made it a part of my work and policy to engage with members of the Board of Supervisors on district-related issues, on city-wide related issues, and that engagement by members of the board and the board as a whole have significantly changed projects, have changed policy, I would go as far as to say everything that the Board of Supervisors, for the most part, has asked us to do as a body, we have done, whether it was free muni or reduced tow fees. I don't believe I've brought a major project recommended a major project to the SFMTA Board of Directors over the opposition of a district supervisor. So I totally get that you all are battered day to day by issues as we are. I just would ask that we recognize that we, even before this latest round of charter amendments and legislation was floated, have always engaged in working with the Board of Supervisors.
Thank
However,
you, Director Ruskin.
yeah.
Sorry, Supervisor Peskin, real quick. Did you have a question at this moment?
No, I don't want to interrupt him,
sorry.
but I'll
Okay.
hop in a second.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to debate the point, just offering a slightly different perspective. But that said, I think we clearly get the pressure that you all are under on matters that are under our jurisdiction. And we certainly want to work with you better so that we can get to better outcomes for everyone, hopefully without delaying the implementation of the work that we need to do to achieve the goals of the city. We'll speak to the work that we've done in recent months, to really in recent years, but more so in recent months, to improve the transparency, accountability, engagement, and responsiveness of our agency. I will be the first to acknowledge and take responsibility for the fact that we need to do that more and better. And regardless of what happens with this legislation, we're absolutely committed to doing so. So I do want to thank you for engaging us in this process. I think we all share the same ultimate goals. I think the idea, the challenge for us collectively is to figure out how to tailor this legislation in a way that gives the board the engagement and voice that it wants. And it's certainly within your purview to have that without jeopardizing the goals that we all have for the city's transportation system. So I'd like to ask Mr. McGuire, if with leave from the chair, to present to you some of what we've been doing and to speak to some of the issues regarding the legislation as we understand it as it's been proposed.
Okay, Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and I'm not being argumentative in any way, and I absolutely, Director Riskin, agree that when the body has weighed in as a whole, the agency has been responsive, and as I said earlier, since Supervisor Safai went down this path, the level of communication has gotten even better. But I did want to, and we're all learning together, and not to put too fine a point on it, but there have been things that used to be in our jurisdiction that we've warned you about, one of them publicly, and that was, and again, we're all learning together in a very rapidly evolving field, but when the issue around permitting of dockless, stationless bicycles came around, there was a warning made in this committee to you guys that you needed to make provisions insofar as Jump Bike was about to enter into a partnership. I think I said at the time was about to be bought by. I turned out to be right. And that you needed to have provisions to deal with that, which ultimately, and granted it's only an 18-month pilot, so we'll get there, but ultimately the level of response was less than adequate. I am sure we will learn as we deal with part 2 or part 3, if you want to go back to segways on sidewalks, with that on e-scooters. And maybe this is not the right forum for it, but I would like to send a message insofar as Division 2 belongs to you and your commissioners who may or may not come and ask if they want us to vote for them. And I really hope that as an agency, and I think that as a matter of policy, you and I agree, but as an agency, you will send a message to these companies that it is time to stop asking for forgiveness and start asking for permission. And the best way you can do that is to put permit conditions in at the front end that say if you transfer your interest from this startup to some massive multi-billion-dollar corporation that we know, because even though they won't divulge to us, we have done our own analytical work to figure out that at peak times, 1 out of 4 cars on the streets congesting San Francisco belong to Uber or Lyft, or are Uber and Lyft drivers. In the same way, you can actually send a message to Bird and Lime and Spin that when you go out with your procurement tomorrow, May 1st, as your commission votes on Division 2, that you will not reward the bad actors. Had this been in our shop, we would have figured that out when I gave you that warning about Jump and Uber. So I just want to get that off my chest. Done.
All right, now I'm wondering if we could hear about some of the process improvements that MTA is proposing.
Yeah,
Or else
happy to do so.
Supervisor Peskin and Safai owe us dinner for how long we're here.
And I'll just say I concur with you fully on that. If we miss the opportunity on that one specific issue, as you say, it will come up again, and we're fully committed to making these permit conditions. We learn a lot from each successive one to making them as strong as possible to protect the city and the people that we serve. So Tom McGuire is going to walk through a brief presentation quickly, speaking to process improvements and some then comment on the legislation.
Okay, good afternoon, supervisors. Tom McGuire, Director of the Sustainable Streets Division at the SFMTA, and I will try to move quickly through this presentation, but I do want to make sure I cover all the ways in which we're trying to make the MTA more responsive to the feedback input and engagement with the Board of Supervisors. As Supervisor Peskin said, since I was here before you last fall, when we first started talking about legislation and charter amendments, you certainly have gotten our attention. I promised that I would come visit each of your offices, talk to you and your staffs about ways in which we could be more nimble, transparent, accountable, engaged, and responsive to the issues that are important to you, and some of the changes that we've made internally within the MTA to not just change processes, not just change staffing and organization, but start to change the culture around the expectations of responsiveness to the board. The first thing I want to mention is the reorganization of our planning team. Supervisor Safai has pointed out the importance of organization and prioritizing the needs of this board in our organization. We've dedicated senior staff as part of a community response team that is there to give focused attention to priority issues of the supervisors, not issues that are our priorities, not issues that are the things that are necessarily part of our capital plan, but the issues that where you've asked us to get unstuck, get to yes, and get solutions on the street that are important to you and to your constituents. In addition to the staff we've devoted to this, we've also devoted $100,000 in each district within our capital plan to make sure these projects happen as fast as possible. Just a few of the examples are on the screen now. 45th and Lincoln pedestrian safety improvements in District 4 being just one example of that. And I'll move on to the next slide.
I'm just going to jump in real quick, though. However, on that slide for work completed, the two that you referenced in District 4 took years, though, of advocating from our office. So anyway, we'll move on.
So our job is to not just get to yes, but get to yes faster. Absolutely. Next slide, we've got just a few photos of some of the things we have been able to break ground on in the field. Supervisor Safai, you and I were out in District 11 on Friday, and it was great to work with you to install a stop sign at DeLong and Wilson, but also very important for me and my staff to see the interaction with your constituents and see how important it is to your residents that they see you getting results and they see the city family being responsive to their needs. And again, just a few more examples, District 1, District 6, District 2, we've been out in the field many times this spring in an effort to send that message that we are, that we want to find some win-wins. We want your constituents to know that you have our attention.
Yes, thank you.
In addition to those specific projects, there are some systems within the MTA that we're working to make more responsive. Just this month, we launched a new feature within the 311 app, wherein we're taking double parking reports. And when customers write in when they see double parking, whether they're driving, cycling, or walking around the city. That helps us build a source of data that we can use to deploy our parking control officers, so that whether we have streets that are congested by double parking in rush hour, neighborhood streets that are not safe to walk or bike because of double parking, we can make sure our scarce enforcement resources are going at the places where double parking is endemic.
Supervisor Kim has a question.
By the way, I did not know that we did this within 311. This is great. Do we actually issue a ticket?
So we can't issue a ticket. We started this about 3 weeks ago, and we're using this primarily as a way to crowdsource data so that we can make sure that parking control officers are in a position to go to the places where double parking is happening again and again and either deter it or issue those tickets.
So the hope is that if we crowdsource locations and photos, then we'll start to get a trend or overall pattern of where double parking is happening, and
That's
hopefully the PCOs will then concentrate their efforts in those neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Doesn't double parking happen everywhere in the city?
Double parking happens everywhere in the city, but we want to know where it affects people the most. And Brian Wiedemeyer from the Bike Coalition brought this to our attention about a year ago, and he rightly pointed out there's no way for cyclists, even on some of our busiest cycling corridors or most important bike lanes, to simply report to MTA, hey, there's double parking here every day at rush hour. So we want to find the places where the most people are affected by it.
Is there, I'm sure there's a set of legal issues around ticketing based off of a phone camera photo, but could you explain that to me? Because it's, you see the license plate clearly blocking the bike lane or double parking. What are the legal issues around issuing a ticket in this instant?
Right, good question. There are very, very limited circumstances in California where a photo can be used to issue a parking or moving violation. Fortunately, one of them is our transit-only lane cameras. So the cameras that are mounted on minibuses can take pictures of cars that are parked in bus lanes and issue tickets, but that's only because special legislation allowing San Francisco to do that has been passed.
Mm-hmm.
So the default is really that cameras are not allowed for that.
Does the law explicitly state that we cannot issue a ticket?
I would be happy to research the specific provisions, but my understanding is that we cannot issue tickets based on photographs.
Okay. I'd love the answer to that question. I'm sure the answer is exactly as you stated. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. But if it was vague or unclear, I would be very open to issuing tickets where there's clear violations of traffic laws. But glad that this is moving forward.
So another dimension of 311 is making sure that we are staffing and resourcing appropriately the engineering teams that respond to the high volume. Over 3,000 times a year, we receive requests from the public for traffic engineering services. These are everything from localized traffic congestion, safety, parking issues. We have a standard in the MTA that we need to close out our 311 cases within 90 days. And that means not just acknowledging that we've received the message, but having brought it to some sort of resolution. About 3 years ago, we were only meeting that standard 50% of the time. Our standard is to meet it 85% of the time. Through targeted staffing, by rededicating some of our best engineers who are capable of doing this work at a high volume and a fast pace to the teams that close out 311 cases and respond directly to constituents. We have since late 2017 been closing 311 cases within our service standard over 90% of the time. And that just again speaks to not just the staffing resources, but the culture change and the expectation that we will be more responsive. And then finally, there's some little things that I want to point out. Many members of this board and your staff have noted to us that our public hearing posters are very hard to read. It's often hard for people in the neighborhoods to understand just what's going to be heard at an MTA public hearing or at an MTA board meeting. So starting this week for the engineering public hearing that will take place in this building on Friday, we're shifting from what you see on the left side of the screen, which is the black and white text-heavy flyer, which we've been putting up for years in neighborhoods, to a full-color, plain language with a map flyer so that people who are interested in engaging with us and coming in down to make public comments or even emailing us public comments actually know what we're proposing. All of this is wrapped up in our longer-term POETS, or public outreach and engagement process. And POETS is about raising the bar and setting a higher standard for MTA to engage members of the public on everything from neighborhood-level parking and traffic changes to multi-million-dollar capital projects.
Supervisor Safai has a question.
Yeah, just go back to that slide. I just want to point out one of the things that we've heard quite a bit about the postings and outreach that you do, and we can come back to this at the end of the presentation. But when you do the postings, are you doing them in multiple languages? So, for instance, like in my district, we have a significant population that speaks Chinese only, Spanish only, Tagalog. So, want to make sure that you're doing your postings and information in multiple languages. So anyway, we can come back to that. Thank you.
Okay. So that's a very quick summary of the ways in which we have, over the last couple months, tried to heed the challenge that you put in front of us in November, and that, to Supervisor Tang's point, honestly, you've been putting in front of us for years, to really take that challenge to heart and change the culture of the agency, dedicate resources, dedicate money and staff to solving the kinds of neighborhood scale problems that, as you've all said today, are the things that your constituents expect you to be able to be accountable for and to help solve. We'd like to offer a couple of comments on the legislation before us today, just in terms of how it fits into some of those efforts to improve our processes. First of all, I won't repeat what Director Riskin said, but I hope we've conveyed that we are fully on board with Supervisor Peskin's point that the private transportation pilots and programs within the city do require a level of input from the city's legislative body, and they're often not simply transportation issues, and we get that, and we support an increased role for the Board of Supervisors in those programs. As we look through the legislation, we've concluded that there were between 500 and 600 decisions made in 2017 that could potentially fall within the purview of the review by the Board of Supervisors described in the legislation. The majority of those decisions are decisions to install or not install a stop sign, and decisions to install or not install a color curb treatment in response to a constituent request. So while we certainly are mindful of the desire to have more accountability, we also...
Madam Chair, can we go back to the last slide? And I'm not trying to be argumentative, Tom, but this is what we call lying with statistics, because each stop sign actually is an action. But when you look at that little slice of commuter shuttle or private transportation program, that one decision affects 1,000 things. So it looks like a little slice, but it's actually, relative to impacts on people's lives, a much larger slice. So I'm not accusing you of lying, but it's a bad pie chart. I mean, if you did it relative to what we hear about, or at least in my district, which is ground zero for all of the emerging technologies, nobody complains to me about stop signs. That happens to my colleague from District 11. Nobody complains to me about stop signs. But everybody complains to me about the other stuff, and you make one, it's not like you did 575 decisions on which Google bus stop. Anyway.
Okay. Point taken. The point of putting this up here was not to try to minimize any individual slice of the pie, and I suppose I get your point about the graphics, but rather to say that there is a large volume of decisions that moves through our board, and many of them are the kind of bread and butter things that I think you've asked us to make sure that we accelerate and don't slow down. So we do want to just make note of the volume of decisions here. And we also want to point out that some of these decisions are tied up in tactical but very important efforts that we're undertaking to improve transit reliability in ways that don't appear to be exempted by some of the exemptions that you've drafted into the ordinance. Some specific examples of that would be something like the contraflow transit lane we installed on Sansom Street, which is improving the reliability of the 10 and the 12 and helping connect Chinatown south of Market and the neighborhoods served by that bus. The project costs less than $10 million, so it doesn't fall into that major transit exemption. It's not, by any definition, a bus rapid transit project, but it does include some pretty significant changes to the way parking and loading are done on those streets. And the reason it includes those things is because when we put together a project like this, We don't want to just put our blinders on and say red bus lane here, signs and signals here. We work with the merchants, we work with the residents. We want to make sure that all of their parking and loading needs are met, because as Supervisor Kim said, there's double parking all over the city. If we don't meet those needs, we're going to end up with a bus lane that doesn't work. And so just a little concern here that having the ability to review the detailed building blocks of a project like that without necessarily the entire project could put you in a position of being asked by our constituents to kind of make changes to an overall project that really is about improving transit reliability. And so one of the two suggested changes that we have to the ordinance is to add a slightly more robust version of the exemption to exempt public transit projects. And a couple of examples of projects that might fall under such an exemption are just listed here. These are projects that have either been they've all been legislated by the MTA board. Many of them are in place already. And again, these are projects we've done to improve the reliability of some of our highest ridership routes, and they are in fact the places where Muni is gaining ridership because of the way we're managing the streets. And then the last thing, I just wanted to offer a couple of comments on the stop sign issue. I think the stop sign issue has been something that has certainly been the bulk of many of the conversations I've had with some of you and some of your colleagues with respect to this legislation and our responsiveness in general. I just want to say that every time there's a stop sign requested that you or any of your staff show any interest in, we are already within the MTA elevating the review of that. Ricardo Alea, our city traffic engineer, and I are personally reviewing the staff decision, and again, really trying to contextualize those decisions and make sure that it's not just a black and white engineering decision, but it's also a decision that takes into account the issues that your constituents have brought to you. So we are already putting a much higher standard of review on stop sign decisions that you've shown an interest in. That said, putting up stop signs, we are bound by certain professional engineering standards. There are streets where we simply cannot legally put stop signs. I know you've heard this before, but we do worry about the potential cumulative impact on Muni performance of putting stop signs on streets that have Muni service on them. And the reason those engineering standards exist is because the theory, and I think this is true in traffic engineering, is that if we put stop signs on too many streets that don't have a lot of traffic, drivers will not respect stop signs. And if they don't respect stop signs, what's going to inevitably happen is those drivers will run stop signs in places where there are pedestrians and there are heavy traffic volumes. And we don't want to counterintuitively add stop signs in such a way that undermines the safety benefits they bring. So for that reason, we also respectfully suggest that perhaps the stop sign review might be handled better in the way we're doing it already, which is a higher level staff review of the requests whenever there's an interest from the supervisors.
Thank you for that presentation. So I know that we have lots we can talk about, but I do want to jump over to the planning department really quick because I know that they also have some thoughts about the legislation. So if we could do that real quick, and I'm sure we'll have a robust dialogue.
Supervisors, good afternoon. Dan Sider with the Planning Department. Thank you very much, Chair Tang, for this opportunity. In deference to your time, I think I might just acknowledge Supervisor Safai's remarks earlier with respect to the additional potential exemption for development projects that would be incorporated into the ordinance if you so choose. As you know, oftentimes our department can require under CEQA or as a condition of approval a loading zone, and this is done in order to minimize conflicts in the street. Similarly, a passenger loading zone could also be asked for. Introducing an additional appeal avenue for a housing project or a commercial project or a mixed-use project would potentially be a third or a fourth bite at the appeal apple. Excuse me, I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer your questions, supervisors.
Just through the chair.
Supervisor Safai?
Yeah, just through the chair. As I said before, we're amenable to that, and I think in this instance, particularly because there's already an avenue that the particular appeal would come to the Board of Supervisors or potentially have to come. So there's really no reason for that to happen an additional time. So we are amenable, and we can read into the record the particular language and work with Deputy City Attorney John Givner on that.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that we are in agreement on that. Not having the Board of Supervisors weigh in on loading zones for developments nor passenger type loading zones. Okay?
That was
Sounds
part
good.
of a development project, yes.
Yes, that are part of, yes. Okay, so I think that concludes the presentations. Is that correct? Okay. I'll just chime in real quick and say that I'm really glad to hear, yes, in the last couple months, some of the changes that MTA is making. However, as you know, staff know from private conversations over the years, I certainly wish that these changes had occurred more quickly and that it wasn't only after the threat of a ballot measure or other ordinances that these changes were made. I think our office is pretty proactive on MTA issues, and as you all know, we have a legendary Excel tracker just for MTA issues in our office because there's so many that come through, you know, our desk, and we have to respond to them. So I certainly hope that what you've outlined here is actually going to happen, and that I do believe there's a good faith effort to really respond to our needs. Now, with that said, I absolutely agree with the goals and intention behind the legislation, as stated by Supervisor Safai and Peskin. To be honest, I've been very torn on this because a lot of times the issues that I hear a lot from our residents, yes, while they might be about safety and stop signs and so forth, a lot of it also has to do with making sure that Muni is running efficiently, reliably. It's safe for people to get on and off the trains. And I don't see how this legislation will actually help with that aspect of it. With residents who travel from the western part of town where it's very far and oftentimes very difficult to get to the other side of town. And we see a lot of issues when there are blockages or delays happening on, you know, on the eastern side, or if there's a Giants game or so forth. I would like to see more in terms of how it is that we can ensure that Muni service is actually better and improved for our residents and our riders. But I will say that I agree with the sentiment that we as supervisors often get a lot of complaints and comments. And I'll just take, for example, the El Terrebel Muni Forward project. Work a lot with the community, took a lot of heat for things that I stood for, such as I agreed with the agency that we should have boarding islands because I think safety is number one, and I do not want to see anyone get killed getting on or off a train. Now, with that said, I wrote a letter to the MTA Board of Directors stating as such that here are all the things that I agree with, even though I took a lot of heat from our merchants and our residents, but here's what I didn't agree with, right? Such as the transit-only lane in our district didn't really make sense. That was not that was not a decision that the board arrived at. So I would say I try my best to weigh in very respectfully, but sometimes that doesn't always translate into the action by the board to reflect the fact that I very carefully weighed all the different comments that I received from the community and went out on a limb to agree with certain things that with the department, but that my community, fought me on. So, I just want to make that comment that when we weigh in, I think it is really important to take those comments into consideration. But, looking at what the Board of Supervisors would have to weigh in on, for example, I don't know that I want to weigh in on adopting time limits for parking meters, nor if there are parking impacts for athletic events, parades, school bus, like SFUSD debarkments, street block parties. I don't want to weigh in on those things, and I don't know how that will improve the experience for our neighbors. However, I think, yes, there are things that are important, such as car share parking spaces. Those were blanketed throughout our districts without consultation with our office. It only happened afterwards, after the MTA board approved them. Commuter shuttle bus zones, I think, are important. So, in a nutshell, there are some things I agree with on this list, some I don't. I don't want to see stop signs, even though it has sometimes been very frustrating working with MTA to get a stop sign approved in certain areas where there's a lot of high traffic and potential for injuries. So this is where I am definitely a bit torn, but I would say that I really hope that this is a moment in time where SFMTA really realizes that we're very serious about trying to better serve our public. And so we hope you'll join us in doing so. Supervisor Safai.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. I appreciate your patience and waiting, allowing Supervisor Peskin and I to go back and forth. But I just want to say a couple of things. This is a compromise piece of legislation. We were going to go to the ballot. It was going to be a much more aggressive proposal. And I can tell you, even though I've only been on the board for a year and a half, I have never seen a more positive response for something that I have proposed than that. Probably what, Supervisor Peskin, we received maybe close to 500 emails collectively, and it was a 80 to 90% approval. People are angry that we're not going to the ballot. So this proposal today, and there are some things that we have taken out. We've taken out 50 residents reviewing something. We wanted to copy and mirror the CU where supervisors could put this on with the signature of one resident. But also, we also have taken out the review of things. Now, this doesn't mean all this stuff is going to come to us. As Supervisor Peskin pointed out, with the CU review where the supervisors sign on, since I've been on the board for a year and a half, we've only had 2 of those. We don't want to review every single one of these decisions, and we have no intention of doing that. But I will tell you, when we proposed our charter amendment back in November, we started talking about, and I think that Director Reskin and Tom and the agency has every best intention, but we've been talking about a community response team for 5-6 months. I still have yet to meet that person. I have no idea who that person is. And so I think Dylan does a great job of reaching out to our staff, but part of the negotiated response and response to our charter amendment was that we were going to have a community response team. This is the first presentation we've received about that on the record. And although stop signs might not be as much of an issue in an older part of the city where you have much more multiple forms of public transportation and older forms of transportation in North Beach, Chinatown, we installed, yes, and the photo is in there, we installed a stop sign where individual neighbors had been asking for 3 years for an area that was significantly in need of a stop sign. I have no idea why it was denied, but I appreciate the SFMTA responding, and I appreciated being out there installing it. And you can ask Mr. McGuire, people were coming out of their house. Multiple people came out of their house, probably at least 10 neighbors on 10 o'clock on a Friday or 11 o'clock on a Friday. They came out to really tell their stories. One woman said, I was the person that personally put in the petition and was denied multiple times. And she came out, she had no idea that we were even installing it that day. So she was ecstatic. So I can tell you, I have no intention of wanting to review every single stop sign or speed bump or traffic calming measure. But what I will say that is one of the goals of what we intended to put forward is there can't always be this burden put on residents to say, you need to go out and gather signatures and do the job of the planners and the engineers and so on to make the case for some of the things that they're being asked for. That is not one email that I got when I first came into office. There was a 90-year-old woman that was asking for a speed bump in front of the church on Santa Rosa. She's never going to go around and get signatures. She can't. She's physically unable to do that. So that's part of the process. Also part of the process that we're trying to talk to you about is, and I had this conversation with President Brinkman, is that when you're doing your noticing and outreach, the planning department has a requirement of a certain number of buildings and residents that need to be notified in a certain radius. There is no standardized process that the SFMTA has to go through in terms of their outreach. And I have seen a significant improvement, and I do commend the department for that. But there is no standardized process. So residents are often left to look for the sign or a posting, or maybe there's some outreach, maybe there hasn't been to the business owners, some have, some haven't. So part of what we're trying to accomplish here today is to talk about some of the standardization of that outreach and review. But no, we have no intention, I have no desire, Supervisor Tang, to review every single stop sign request. But I do want the ability in there if there is a significant request. One of the areas that we had a stop sign installed, again, neighbors organized for multiple years, and pedestrians were hit on that location. And there is a conflict sometimes between the desire of Muni and desire of pedestrians. And so we have this conflict embedded in Vision Zero goals and Muni goals. And so we're trying to come up with a solution on how we can work together with your agency. So I would just say, just before we get to public comment, that many of these amendments that we're putting forward are part of a larger negotiated compromise. And I think we've come to a good resolution.
So speaking of standards, I'm just curious, and I don't know who would be the one to answer this, but under what criteria will we as a board of supervisors be reviewing these particular items? So for example, blue zones, green zones, yellow zones. I know that it has been stated this legislation is modeled off the CU process for planning. There we have a criteria of whether a project is necessary and or desirable. But what is the criteria here for these? Whether it's we like a blue zone or not?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. In the CU process, you're reviewing a decision by the Planning Commission in a quasi-adjudicatory capacity. So you have to make findings based on the legal standard that applies. Here, you will be acting in a legislative capacity, reviewing the MTA board or the MTA director's legislative decision. So basically,
within 60 days.
Right. There are going to be procedural parameters, but you'll have legislative discretion. If the board, the way that the ordinance is structured, if the board decides to reverse the MTA's decision, the board will make findings about why you have reversed, why you've reached a different conclusion. The standards that you apply will be determined by the board.
Okay, so it's pretty subjective based on what I'm hearing in terms of what we like or don't like. Okay, and I would like to at a later time in this meeting also ask that if we really truly are going to try to model off of the CU process, maybe not the standard but the process, if we could increase the threshold from 4 supervisors to 5 in terms of the number who would be able to get the appeal to the Board of Supervisors. Okay, so we'll ask for that later. And then also I would just point out as well that sometimes it's very difficult, I think, if we're hearing like a planning appeal, there's a specific project in our district, and it's a building there. With these, it tends to, I think, impact potentially other parts of the city. I'm not talking about, blue zones or whatnot, but let's say a stop sign where it might impact a bus that you're trying to get on a rapid network or something like that. So I do think and caution that we may be faced with situations where maybe a community wants a stop sign, but it may also hinder transit effectiveness as well. So with that said, Supervisor Peskin, did you have another question before we go to public comment?
I'm happy to hear from the public. I had a number of questions, mostly to the city attorney. I would agree with you. Relative to the CU process, I was only referring to the appellate portion of it. The CU process had been in place for many, many years, just the appellate process, and I agree with you that 5, which was how the CU appeal from the board to itself works. So I would agree with that. I do, in addition, I'm not a member of the committee, to the amendments that I recommended before. Deputy City Attorney Givner also pointed out that at page 5, line 8, we would have to make a conforming amendment to conform to the deletion of the fee at page 4, line 20, to remove the words "and any filing fee paid shall be returned to the requester." And I did have some questions for the city attorney. There was, and before we hear from the public, I should probably also put on the record that I would also like a committee member to make one other change at page 2, line 11, which is the provision that says that a final SFMTA decision shall not include a decision by the MTA that was contemplated as part of the implementation of a prior final MTA decision, which I think is extremely vague. And as I said to my staff earlier today, this piece of legislation has been contemplated for a decade. So I would like to remove at page 2, line 11, the words "was contemplated as part of the implementation of a prior final SFMTA decision and/or which will prevent us from getting into lots of different skirmishes and are all yelling at Deputy City Attorney Kennedy.
Okay. So, all right. With that said, then we'll jump to public comment first, and then we'll resume our conversation. So any members of the public who wish to comment on item 3, please come on up.
Good afternoon, Chair Tang and supervisors. My name is Brian Wiedenmeyer, Executive Director, San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. Before I launch into the meat of my comments, I would like to take a moment to thank the authors of this amendment, Supervisors Peskin and Safai, for working with those of us who care about active transportation in our city to make this appeals ordinance do what we think it should do rather than what we think it shouldn't do. Let me begin by stating that the SFMTA is an imperfect agency. It must do more to deliver safe streets for people walking, biking, and taking transit, and it must deliver those projects faster. If we hope to see the SFMTA lead the way in achieving Vision Zero, in meeting our ambitious climate goals, in realizing our transit-first policy, we have to give the agency the ability to act with some speed and relative independence. My concern and our concern as people who bike about the original draft of this appeals ordinance was that it posed a threat to that independence, and if adopted, would slow down the delivery of crucial transportation projects across our city. We agree with the removal of the public petition threshold for appeal, as it would consume endless hours of this body's time in hearing appeals based on stop signs, parking spots, you name it. We agree that the threshold number of supervisors necessary to hear an appeal should be increased to 5 in line with conditional use appeals. We thank the authors for considering amendments that strengthen the exemptions to include specific bike lane exemptions and transit projects and hopefully other Vision Zero projects as well. The goal of having the SFMTA be more responsive is a noble one, and we want to see an appeals ordinance that includes prioritized access to safe and affordable, healthy transportation choices. So we hope that this legislation can be amended to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. My name is Glenn Texera, and I run the largest linen and uniform company in California. I am in the Dogpatch area of San Francisco, and I'd like to talk today for a moment about my experience with the MTA. It was a very positive experience, and it surprised me greatly. I come from a background of running business, and I'm not all that familiar with the way the system works. I heard at the 11th hour about the program to handle parking in my area, and was surprised that when I reached out to the MTA that there was response, strong response, and I actually got some of the things that I wanted by working, which is a huge surprise to my wife, who I had been complaining for weeks about having to deal with regulation of parking. And at the end of the day, I was in great support of it and really appreciated working with the MTA, with Hank and a number of his people on the team. And I was surprised that I was able to actually get something done. The reason I came here today is I wanted to let you guys know that I was very pleased with that. And as a default, I am never a strong fan of more oversight as a default, because I like to see things get done, and things did get done, which was pleasing. We're the last linen and uniform company in the city of San Francisco. There were probably about 10, 15 years ago, and they've all had to find ways to move out. So I appreciated that they were able to listen to us and able to get things done, and wanted to at least give my support and make sure that you were aware that I'm very pleased with the MTA and what they did for us. I will let the rest of you battle out the details of the arena that I'm not familiar with on who's in control and who's in charge. So enjoy.
Thank you for that. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Rachel Hayden. I'm the Executive Director of San Francisco Transit Riders. And like the name, we are a group of transit riders who want to see fast, efficient, and reliable service. I'm here today because we're concerned that this appeals process before the committee is going to hinder MTA's ability to deliver the service improvements that riders deserve. I do want to recognize that this ordinance, or at least in part, arose from a frustration with MTA that is a real problem: responsiveness, transparency, accountability. But as written, it doesn't actually address those problems. And what it does do is add another layer of process to an already complicated and confusing process that is undoubtedly going to result in further delay to crucial transit priority projects. I'm happy to hear that the public petition threshold has been removed, and I would encourage the number of supervisors necessary to hear an appeal to be increased to 5. And I was happy to hear you, Chair Tang, to mention that. But most importantly, the language for MTA decisions that are exempt from review needs to include any municipal railway transit priority project. You saw the list that Tom showed earlier of several projects that would improve reliability, that would improve service delivery, that would be subject to this appeals process and will undoubtedly cause further delay to rolling those projects out. So again, I urge you to exempt any municipal railway project that seeks to improve service reliability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Jody Maziris, and I'm the executive director for Walk San Francisco. I'm here to express my serious concerns about this ordinance and how this ordinance will slow down the SFMTA in a city that desperately needs our transportation agency to speed up. Just this weekend, we had another pedestrian fatality. A 40-year-old man died trying to cross 19th Avenue. And 2 weeks ago, an Ingleside resident was killed walking home from church. 2 pedestrian fatalities in April and 5 already this year. There is no time to wait and debate street safety redesign because people are dying going about their everyday business. We believe this appeals legislation in the way it is currently written seriously threatens Vision Zero, a citywide goal to end all serious and fatal traffic crashes by 2024. Just this month on Walk to Work Day, we're all standing on the steps of City Hall expressing our commitment to Vision Zero, and I want to remind us that we only have 5 more years left to get to the goal of zero, and we still have a long way to go. Walk San Francisco would like to see Vision Zero projects added to the list of exemptions in this ordinance. We would also like to see an increase in the number of supervisors needed to appeal from 4 to 5, and thank you, Supervisor Tang, for making this recommendation. We know that SFMTA is not a perfect organization. They certainly have their challenges. But we believe we should be finding solutions for the SFMTA to do more, to deliver on Vision Zero projects faster, and not to slow them down. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my organization's concerns and the safety that it will lead to on our streets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Alyssa Kias, and I'm here representing SPUR. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this item. The appeals legislation before this committee, as currently drafted, will hinder the city's ability to provide a functional and sustainable transportation system. SFMTA must do more to make transit more reliable and efficient, to deliver projects that make our streets safer for biking and walking, and to deliver them faster. But this ordinance will seriously curtail the SFMTA's ability to deliver crucial transportation projects across our city. The SFMTA needs to be able to act with speed and independence to achieve Vision Zero, to improve access and mobility for people across the city. To safeguard the city's ability and to make the transportation system work, we believe that the following changes need to be made to this legislation. 1, we support Supervisor Tang's proposal to change the threshold number of supervisors necessary to hear an appeal to 5, in line with conditional use appeals. And 2, the appeals legislation should include exemptions for transit projects and other Vision Zero projects. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Eileen Boken with Speak, here on my own behalf. I support this legislation in principle as a means of restoring some checks and balances. My question would be if this review could apply to prior decisions.
Thank you very much. Any members of the public who wish to comment on item 3? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. I don't believe, in response to the last public speaker's question, correct me if I'm wrong, Deputy City Attorney John Givner, but I don't believe that this legislation would be retroactive to prior MTA decisions.
No.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. No, the legislation couldn't be retroactive. With the amendment that Supervisor Peskin proposed a few minutes ago, the board could review new decisions that are related to projects that it had already reviewed. So you could have multiple, basically, appeals of different MTA decisions over time within a single project.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with all respect to the representative from Spur, who I think were one of the original proponents of Proposition A, including the carve-out that I proposed, the sky will not fall. There will be a handful of decisions that are reviewed on an annual basis, as I referenced earlier, relative to the board bringing conditional uses before it. And hopefully they will be things that positively impact the public realm and transportation, particularly around the ever-evolving world of new emerging mobility technology, where Director Riskin and this board agree that actually having some accountable elected officials make tough decisions in the end, and regardless of who our mayor may be and how that individual may be affiliated with tech billionaires and venture capital companies, this is the people's house, and actually having a bunch of city council members, if you will, who have to hear it every day on the streets of San Francisco will be a positive thing. So with all due respect to Spur, I put that in Prop A precisely to have this level of oversight. It is a decade overdue, and it is coming shortly. I agree, as I said earlier with my thumbs up, that we should change the threshold to 5 supervisors. I did have a couple of questions for the city attorney, and I mean no disrespect. I didn't mean any disrespect to the speakers, but I actually wanted to give our 2 deputy city attorneys a heads up about the questions I was going to ask, and that's why I walked over there. Most importantly, and this probably also implicates the clerk of the Board of Supervisors, has to do with timing issues at page 4 in subsection C2 relative to the window of not less than 10 days and not more than 30 days. And I just wanted to hear from the city attorney, and this is really just a kind of temporal issue, as well as potentially from the clerk's office. I think it might need a little bit of massaging, and we have a week to do that. So Deputy City Attorney Givner, if you want to offer any thoughts or advice on that issue.
Sure. I spoke a bit with the clerk's office earlier today. That office has some thoughts. Basically, the constraint we're working with here is that the board must make a decision within 60 days, or at least that's the board's window to overturn the MTA's decision. And with the board's recesses, we just want to make sure that there's plenty of time built in there. Some of the decisions about the number of days were made back when there was an option for a number of members of the public to bring the item for review, and we needed to build in some time to make sure that all those members of the public followed the right processes. So we can work with both of your offices and the clerk's office over the next week to try to nail down what dates make the most sense operationally and from your perspective.
Right, just through the chair, just to build on that, I just want to ensure, it was my understanding, at least the way I was reading it, was that we had to at least make an attempt to review the decision that happened within 60 days, or we have to have our work done within that 60-day period.
Your work has to be done within 60 days, or else the decision is affirmed. So if you want to,
and that's based on the reading of the charter.
That deadline is in the charter, so it squeezes the timelines a little bit, which is I think why the clerk's office wanted to maybe play with some of the numbers and make sure that we get it right to give the board.
But I mean, it
time.
would be just like any other hearing. through the chair, just like any other hearing, we would have it agendized, and there would be maybe a special hearing item, and then once that was decision made, we would, as you said, make affirmative actions to determine either overturn or amend or whatever.
Yeah. You only need to have one hearing. So some of the questions are, how much time should you give to file the appeal? How long after the date of filing should we notice the hearing to occur? Should the clerk provide
Right.
10
Okay.
days notice? Those kinds of issues.
Right, okay. And then that also would cover then public noticing and so on.
My deputy's here to answer any questions.
Ms. Samara.
Hi, Elisa Samara for the Office of the Clerk of the Board. Yes, we're trying to figure out where the sweet spot pretty much is, just because we didn't realize there was a 60-day time constraints. It's different than other appeals where we're able to continue them out to farther dates where we can hold the hearing but put off the decision. So we're still working with that.
And Madam Chair, I think one thing that's very important is this 60-day hard stop for the Board of Supervisors to opine or not should allay the fears and statements made by a few members of the public, and specifically the representative from SPUR. As Director Riskin knows, I always like to needle him that when there's a problem and a supervisor mentions it to Mr. Nuru, it happens in about 24 hours. And when you mention it to Mr. Riskin, and I appreciate the fact that he is following the letter and the spirit of the law, it takes 6 to 8 to 10 months. So this 60-day hard stop is not going to be the end of the world. And I do, insofar as I still have the floor, have one other question for the city attorney.
Go ahead.
So the other question has to do with the definition of a final SFMTA decision. And I note that at page 3, starting at line 14, the words changes in operating structure as it relates to private transportation programs is stricken. And insofar as the main thrust of my interest in this legislation really revolves around, and Director Riskin agrees with having legislative supervisorial oversight around that particular body of policy, I'm wondering, A, why those words are stricken there, and B, if there are other ways that this legislative body can still get to those issues in or around pilot programs or other ways. So I wanted to give that to council to answer.
Deputy City Attorney John Gibner again. The reason that it's stricken is essentially to line it up with the authority that the charter gives to the board. So the board has authority which you'll exercise under this ordinance, to review certain types of decisions, time limitations for parking, preferential parking, et cetera, but doesn't have discretion under the charter to review the types of decisions that are listed in the struck out portion about changes of operating structure of permittees. The board, when it initially considers an MTA decision, could put parameters on that decision to ensure that your concerns are met. You could apply permit conditions to the program. You could also, as you suggested, make it a pilot program. So if you have concerns about how something might roll out, the MTA has approved a 5-year program, say, the board could ultimately make that on review a 1-year program, so that the program would come back to the Board of Supervisors at the end of a year if the MTA decides to continue it.
Thank you, Councilor. And then finally, Madam Chair, I just wanted to say for the record that I want to thank and acknowledge my staff, Lee Hepner, for all of his work on this, together with Supervisor Safai's staff.
Thank you. And one thing I did want to point out that we will now be able to hear on appeal if this legislation passes is regarding the oversized vehicle restrictions. That's something that my predecessor had worked on because we had such a huge issue down by Great Highway by the beach and the park. I know that there's been sort of a halting of this program as of late, but that there have been talks with the Department of Homelessness and SFMTA on a new kind of revised type of program that would help attempt to get more services to those individuals living in campers. So I know that this is on our list for things that we might be able to see on appeal, but I'd like, today I'm using this opportunity to say that I want the department and the board to really move forward with that idea that you had shared with me with Director Kositsky, because I do like it very much, and I think it's a great way for us to try to address some of the issues that we see with the campers, but get the individuals the help they need. Okay, so Supervisor Safai?
Yeah, I have a couple more things I wanted to ask. So I just wanted to ask Director Reskin to come back up for a second, if he has a minute. So I just wanted to kind of go back to my issue about the staffing and the reorganization, and I know we talked about that, and we've talked about that for a long time, but what's a firm date in terms of your community response team being implemented in place?
It's in place now.
Oh. So I have someone assigned?
That's correct.
Oh, okay. So maybe we can set up a time to brief have all the offices been introduced and briefed? Yeah, I know.
I don't know the status of that, but that's something that we've talked to. I thought we had talked to all of your offices about. If we hadn't, that's my bad.
No, that's okay. Maybe Tom knows more, but I have not met my community response team person. I don't know if any of the other supervisors have. So that would be really good to figure that out. And then there's I know you put in there that there's a money allocated per district, and I think this is good. This is a really important step. I just wanted to, for the record, I wanted to know when that was going to be in place. So if that you could come around, set those briefings up. It doesn't look like any of the other supervisors have met their team yet. So have you, Supervisor?
Dude, if I get any more briefings from the MTA, it's all working good.
At least you can meet. At least so that was one. So it doesn't look like anyone's met there. The other thing I wanted to ask Deputy City Attorney Givner through the chair. So with regard to the decision on the bike parking stations, I just wanted to have a little bit more clarity on that, because some of these bike stations are actually put on the sidewalk. They're not necessarily on the street. And sometimes they remove metered parking, which is part of our review process, as well as some of the things that aren't necessarily just in red zones. So I just want to have a clear understanding as to why these bike stations are not included in our ability to review.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner again. So the bike stations on the street, which would be within the MTA's jurisdiction, aren't included because they don't fit into the specific categories that are authorized under the charter regarding time limitations, et cetera. Bike stations on the sidewalk would be DPW jurisdiction, so they're not included in this ordinance because you wouldn't be reviewing the MTA's decision.
Right. Okay. So, but it doesn't seem as though these were even contemplated back when the charter amendment. So I don't even know if there's any. I think that what the determination was that because these are a red zone, they're not a part of your review because you can't review red zones, but you are, in some instances, removing metered parking to put these in place. So it seems to me as though this is a little bit more of a gray area.
Unlike a change in meter timing, this is a decision to absolutely prohibit parking, right, on that spot, where you now have the bike parking. So the charter allows you to review decisions to limit the time of parking.
Do they define limit?
Sorry?
Do they define limit?
They do not, but our advice and our reading of that charter provision, especially in light of what comes before it regarding the MTA's exclusive authority generally and how this is a specific carve-out, our advice is that the board has authority to review time limitations, but not to review absolute prohibitions on parking and stopping, which is why this ordinance doesn't review, for instance, red zones.
Okay. Through the chair, I'll follow up with you all on that one. But other than that, I think I've pretty much said clearly what our amendments were. And did Supervisor Peskin, did you speak specifically about the fee waiver? I mean, I know we talked about that, so we're
Yep,
good.
he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Supervisor Kim?
And by the way, I'm sorry, one last thing. I am also in favor of putting the threshold at 5 supervisors.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. And I also support upping the threshold to 5. And I do want to just acknowledge that our board of directors are here. And so I just want to thank Director Rupke and Brinkman and Ramos for being here today and spending your time with us. I do want to say, just on a positive note, that I really have had a very good working relationship with SFMTA over my 7 years in terms of moving forward many of the Vision Zero improvements that our office has fought for, curb outs and daylighting, protected bike lanes. And while the projects don't often move as quickly as I would like them to, I do feel like I've had a very good line of communication. You know, I think the one issue that we've never really been able to work out is a way to figure out some type of parking permits in these new mixed-use neighborhoods, which is really the future of San Francisco neighborhoods. It's true that traditionally we've had residential neighborhoods and commercial neighborhoods in San Francisco, but the residential neighborhoods that we are now building, largely in my district and in District 10 and 9 are mixed-use neighborhoods, so they traditionally don't fall under the RPP permits. And while I would like a city where no one owned cars or no one had to own cars, you know, I do think there has to be some balance. And so that is the one issue I have pushed on over my 7 years that we have not found a solution towards. But other than that, I really do feel like I've been able to push through many of the items that I'd like to see here at the board. I probably have a different set of constituencies from my other colleagues, and so I want to really respect what they have been hearing and, you know, the changes that they'd like to see. I'm a little hesitant to see more appeals come before the Board of Supervisors, but I do think that eliminating the 50 resident appeal process and limiting it to 5 members of the board will, I hope, help with that process. And hopefully we will have a bigger say over, I think, some of the bigger projects that Supervisor Peskin was referring to, I think in large part like the e-scooters and commuter shuttle buses. I think those large city programs, I do have a lot of questions and concerns, and it's very frustrating because we have to hear from the constituents on those issues, but we don't often get to weigh in on it except to, you know, certify an exemption of a CEQA determination, which is very dissatisfying and then often confuses our constituents in terms of what our positions on programs are. But on stop signs and daylighting and I think meter hours, I share Supervisor Tang's kind of reluctance to be able to hear those issues. I think the Board of Directors does a great job of moving through some of those day-to-day minutia. And what I would like to see are the big programmatic programs that SFMTA oversees. So that's just my overall feeling. I do want this to move through because I know that Supervisor Peskin and Safai have spent quite a bit of time working on this. And as this moves forward, I think over the next year, we should certainly see how this does impact some of our city priorities. My big concern, of course, being our Vision Zero implementation work, because I certainly would not want to see that get slowed down because we are talking about lives. And not necessarily fatalities only, but injuries, which have tremendous long-term consequences on people's lives and their families and their communities. So thank you, colleagues, for all of your work on this. I will support this today. Definitely think that we should have a year point at which we evaluate how this has been working with this board, and I know that Supervisor Peskin and Safai will be on the board to ensure that, and that would just be my one suggestion today at Land Use.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. I actually was going to say the exact same thing. I reluctantly am supporting this. I would like for us to see how this is going, whether it's actually effective before continuing down this road, and to leave room for change or even potential repeal, depending on how it goes. But I'm willing to experiment. And again, the ultimate goal is to ensure that we're actually being more responsive to community members. So with that, we had a couple amendments on the floor. We had Supervisor Safai wanted to add stop signs as part of the review. There was a suggestion from the planning department around exempting out loading zones for developments, which also includes passenger loading zones. There was a suggestion about increasing the supervisor threshold from 4 to 5 in terms of putting appeals on our Board of Supervisors docket. And there was the elimination of the 50 signatures or more for an appeal, as well as the filing fee. Is there anything else I missed?
Yes, there was on page 2, line 11, from was contemplated all the way to
that's right.
and/or. Yeah.
And then there was the definition of bicycle lane on page 1 at line 18, and then as a defined term on page 2 at line 12, capitalizing bicycle and lane. And I believe everything else you referenced, Madam Chair.
Okay, and then, of course, our clerk's office recommendation,
right,
which we will, I believe, get to next week or next time around.
Are you talking about the filing fee waiver?
No, about the 10-day,
deadline.
30-day window.
Okay, got it.
The
Well,
window.
that was also one. Didn't we do the filing fee waiver?
Yes, I mentioned that.
Oh, sorry.
Which appears in 2 places, which I mentioned, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that was it? Okay. Oh, Deputy City Attorney?
In the document that Supervisor Safai distributed at the start of the meeting, I believe there are a number of different proposed amendments around timing, including the 10 to 30 days, the timing for the clerk's office to review the supervisors or members of the public request for review. Is the committee making those amendments subject to more changes next week, or just removing all of those amendments from the document now so that you can make all changes to the process next week?
Just through the chair, I think we should, unless someone disagrees, I think we should do not less than 10 days, but no more than 30 days, and then work on the language. I mean, that was what we had worked out in prior to this meeting with the Deputy City Attorney, along with our 2 offices.
And then there are a number of other changes about the process and timing on pages 4 and 5.
Right, upon receipt of review, and goes into the 48 business hours. I didn't read those into the record because I thought we had as submitted to form, but if I needed to highlight those, I think we should leave those as is. And then if we need to make additional changes, that's fine. I just had one point of clarification to what Supervisor Tang summarized. And it was it was about the development projects. It was amending the definition of the final MTA decision to be included in development projects.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And I think you understand what we're referring to, Deputy City Attorney Givner?
Yeah, this is the Supervisor Tang's reference to the loading zones. I believe it's a new definition of the term development project, but then excluding that from the matters that are subject to Board of Supervisors review.
It would be excluded. It would be on line 19, page 1, final SFMD, any decision, and then there would be when you get to the shall not include on page 2, line 10, we would insert that as an item, right?
Okay.
So basically so final to exclude development projects, and then you define development projects. Do you have that language? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And then, Madam Clerk, do we have to take each amendment separately, or should we adopt them sort of as a whole, or what do you recommend?
Them all as a whole.
Okay. All right. Is that okay with all the committee members? Even though, again, I don't really care to review stop signs, I will take all of this as a whole. Okay, we will do that.
Duly noted.
Without objection. Okay, and then as amended, can we get a motion on the item?
So I'd like to make a motion to send this item to the full board with positive.
Oh, nope. Continue.
We have to continue this item for 1 week.
Okay, so motion to continue for this item as amended for 1 week. We'll do that without objection. Thank you. And thank you to SFMTA and everyone else who is here for this item. Madam Clerk, are there any other items before us today?
There's no further business.
Okay, we are adjourned.